Recording in progress.
Good evening, and welcome to the December 14th. Let me just turn off my sound here. Pardon me. Good evening and welcome to the December 14th, 2023 meeting of the Humboldt County Planning Commission. I'm Noah Levy. Before we get started, I just want to call your attention as usual to the second page of our agenda, which describes the ways that you can watch or participate in the meeting remotely. If you are on a computer and wish to comment, the best way to do so would be through the Zoom link, which is there at the top of page 2. You can also comment by phone. You can also participate by phone, and you can watch a live stream of the meeting on the humboldt.legstar.com webpage. But if you do so and wish to make a comment, just note that it runs 30 seconds or a minute behind real time. With that, I would invite you all to join me for a salute to the flag. Laura, could we have a roll call of commissioners present?
Commissioner Scavdall,
Here.
Commissioner Levy,
Here.
Commissioner Landry, Commissioner Mulder, Commissioner O'Neill, Commissioner Mitchell, Commissioner West. Here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we only have 3 out of 7, and that is not a quorum. We knew we were going to be short a couple of commissioners. There's still a chance that 1 or 2 others may arrive. But having discussed it with staff, we think that what makes sense is to go ahead and have a staff presentation and discussion of the one item on our agenda, which is the sign ordinance. So I will get to public comment on non-agenda items, but we're going to go ahead and have the meeting. But if we don't have at least one more commissioner arrive, we will not be taking any action tonight. Before we get to the next item, also, Laura, I just wanted to acknowledge that our wonderful Planning Commission clerk, Laura McClanagan, has been out for about a month after a serious car accident, and it's really great to have you back with us tonight, Laura.
Well, thank you for your concern and kind words, and I'm ready for the meeting. I'm on the mend, so too bad we may not have one.
Yeah. Okay, but thank you for being here. Okay, that brings us to item C, agenda modifications. Director, is there anything you wanted to comment as far as agenda modifications?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The only modification that I'd like to make to the agenda is that it identifies the next meeting is at on January 4th, it should say 2024. That, unfortunately, meeting, we did not have enough items ready to move forward to justify a meeting. So we will not be having a meeting on January 4th. The next meeting will be on January 18th.
Okay, thank you for that. And before we get into the one substantive item on the agenda, we come to item D, which is public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anyone either in the room or on Zoom or phone who wishes to comment on an item pertaining to the Planning Commission's jurisdiction, but which is not on the agenda tonight? In other words, anything other than the sign and billboard ordinance. I see no hands raised either in the room or on Zoom, so we will close public comment on non-agenda items. And with that, we'll get to the sign ordinance discussion. Just to note, we will certainly have public comment on that, but I think it'll be most fruitful for the public wishing to comment to let the planner, Jacob Dunn, walk us through his presentation, perhaps with some questions and answer with the commission, and then we'll get to a point where we open it up for public comment. Okay? So thanks, Jacob. Go ahead.
Is that doing it?
Can you make that full screen?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Let's see. There it is. Sorry, some of these controls are getting in the way with the Zoom. Sorry, I don't actually know how to get it to full screen from this presenter view. It's kind of... Do you know how to exit?
Perhaps while we're waiting, Laura, while we're waiting for Jacob to begin his presentation, we can note that Commissioner Mitchell has arrived, and therefore we do have a quorum. Just wanted to get that into the record.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So done.
Sorry about the tough technical difficulties. Let's see. Let's get these. There we go. Okay. Well, good evening, Commissioners. This is the second hearing for the draft sign ordinance. At the last hearing, I presented the full draft ordinance along with some public comments, and then we had some deliberation briefly. Tonight, I'd like to bring up a few key points for our discussion. For contextual purposes, I want to address how this project began and ended up where it is. Initially, we began this project by focusing on billboards and specifically followed the language of the county general plan. The general plan includes an implementation measure to amend the sign ordinance to implement adopted policies for billboards. And those adopted policies of the general plan indicate conservation of scenic resources, terms for billboards and their prohibition, and impacts on sensitive habitats. The adopted standards included term limits, restrictions on digital message billboards or boards, and permit requirements for new billboards and expansion of existing billboards. So after discussion and review of draft billboard requirements, we found it appropriate to address lighting in implementation measure 2 of the scenic resources, which was to consider other revisions to the sign ordinance as a whole. And since the last hearing, we went ahead and made a few revisions to address some comments that were made. We revised the purpose statement. We also revised the display size and time frame for temporary signage. We made a few adjustments to principally permitted signage requirements. We added a section to address master sign plans for properties with multiple businesses and updated the language of the billboard ordinance to be more uniform with state law. Let's go to the next slide. There it goes. So one of the questions that we want to ask is the current language consistent with our general plan, or does it need revisions? And so that's one of the big questions that we want to ask here. So as you can see on the slide here, this is what we currently have, and that's what we worked with to come up with what revisions might be necessary to address what the general plan is calling for. And so some other questions to think about when we discuss is whether we want to create permitting conditions that are similar to the city of Eureka, which would add new permit types and requirements to the code, or work with the permit types that we currently have. So like special permits, conditional use permits, and what kind of signage do we want to encourage, and do they align with the general plan, the goals and implementation measures and policies of the general plan? So I think these are some important questions to ask when we get into discussion. And this basically concludes my presentation, since I believe tonight will probably be more of a discussion about what has been drafted and what exists. So if you have any questions about the ordinance and you would like anything pulled up on the screen, just let me know and I can bring it up.
Yeah, Jacob, could you go back to the slide showing the existing zoning
Yeah.
ordinance? So this is the existing sign ordinance that the county has. This is all of it. And so as you can see, it, the .6 section there is really the section that is most applicable to all the signage within commercial districts.
Director, if I
Yes.
may. This is for appurtenant signage and off-premise signage. There are other codes, sections for property sale signage and for
Right.
something else, but
Yeah,
just to
yeah.
clarify.
So one of the things that we wanted to present tonight was that clearly we believe that the general plan clearly articulates that we need to modify the sign ordinance to address billboards. But then the second question is whether or not we've expanded the work a little bit to look at other forms of signage. And it's because that provision that we just showed you really doesn't address things like digital displays, flashing signs, the amount of illumination that's allowed, while the general plan really does ask for or regulatory guidance in terms of limiting lighting, limiting impacts to scenic areas. And then some other questions came up as we were looking at that, such as with the digital signage that is scrolling and inviting people to read things. You know, as a community, do we really want people to be reading digital reader boards that are showing new text on it as they're driving down the road? I mean, that's a public health, safety, and welfare issue. And so one of the things that we really wanted to start with the commission tonight is, do you want to try to tackle that? Because we, in all honesty, had trouble reading the kind of the temperature of the commission in our last discussion. I mean, we can leave the sign ordinance the way, or the sign provisions the way they are in the ordinance right now, and just tackle billboards. And so that's a big question. And then we wanted to just kind of work down with kind of big question ideas if you do want to address it. I mean, one of the things that looking at the city of Eureka that they do is that they have 3 basic sign types. One is an administrative permit, which is what we've proposed here and given some guidance to that in terms of the size. Anything beyond that would then be a discretionary permit. And that's basically what Eureka does. They go from an administrative permit to the permit, the master sign permit for shopping centers for multi-tenant sites, which is then approved by the design review committee. And then they have the creative sign permit, which is also reviewed and approved by the design review committee. So it's like you fit within, you know, a single kind of limited box. If you can do that, it's an administrative permit. If you want to go beyond that, or if your circumstances are like a shopping center where you need some more flexibility, you have an increasing level of review. That's what the ordinance that we've presented has attempted to do. It's not quite as elaborate as the city of Eureka, primarily because we don't have as many signs as the city of Eureka ever will. But we're certainly open to following that model a little bit with more detail, but really wanted to have a discussion of whether or not the commission's interested in really trying to pursue that in the first place. So that's the first question for you. Other than billboards, are you interested in trying to tackle those bigger questions relative to signs?
Okay, well, do we have any commissioners who want to respond to that kind of threshold question?
I think I first have a process question. So do we want to discuss whether or not we're doing that before we take public comment, or do we want to take public comment before we get into where we stand on things?
So that, one of the things that Chair and I discussed was allowing the public to kind of get a sense of what the commission's thinking,
Great.
since this is being introduced tonight for discussion, and then allowing the public to respond to that.
So we figure we can have some of a discussion, or at least an initial discussion of these kind of top-level issues before we do take public comment.
That sounds good. Well, I guess I'll start us off. Where I stand is I would at minimum like to discuss digital signs, animated signs, movement signs. I think that those are, I think it would benefit all of Humboldt County to discuss and potentially put some sideboards on those types of signs beyond billboards. I might be a little biased being an employee of the city of Eureka, but I do think that the processes that city of Eureka uses for sign permits, like while not perfect, do a pretty good job of providing administrative permits when needed, and then things that need more deliberation go to a body. So I would be interested in exploring that, but I'm also curious to hear what the other commissioners have to say.
I just want to speak up before I go any further. I should have mentioned this right at the outset, but under the heading of ex parte disclosures, I wanted to disclose the fact that I guess about a week before the first hearing on this item, no, forget now if it was before the first hearing or since the first hearing, I admit. But I did have a meeting, I think it was after the first hearing. I did have a meeting with Jeff Wills, who is a local entrepreneur in the business of building signs for various clients, and didn't discuss much about billboards provisions, but did take his comment under advisement about the terms that we had in the draft ordinance at that time about other signs. So I just wanted to disclose that conversation. Okay, but any other initial thoughts about this question of how much we want to get into this? Yes, is your hand up? Commissioner Mitchell, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to start out by announcing that I also had the same conversation with Jeff Wells, and the discussion essentially heard his examples of where the proposed language would potentially not allow, or the existing signs that there are would be challenged. That being said, onto my comments, I feel that we do want to regulate signs. I think that staff's done a good job of setting up a draft. My hope is that when we're done, we'll have a set of guidelines where the majority of signs that would be similar to ones that have already been approved, exist, or haven't raised controversy, will continue to be done in a way that doesn't involve the Planning Commission. But I like the idea of a design review committee, or even, say, the zoning administrator or us being able to look at the 20% or the ones that would cause controversy. So I don't think that eliminating that review would be in the public's best interest.
Commissioner Scavdell?
Yeah, hey, I support having a a more detailed sign ordinance. I think the general plan guidelines are fairly vague and don't provide as much clarity to the applicant. So I think, you know, an ordinance that's clear in what's allowed and what's not allowed, and then what the process is to make exceptions or get the special permits on things that are allowed would help businesses understand what they need to do when putting up signs in the county. So I think, and I tend to think less is more, so I like to keep these ordinances as tight and concise as we can, and I think this is, our first attempt is doing a pretty good job at that so far. I hope that we as a commission don't start hanging a lot of other stuff onto the ordinance, if we can avoid it.
Yeah, thank you. And if I can just jump in, and since I didn't really comment substantively, I will say I basically agree with what the other commissioners have said. I do, Director Ford, believe that there's a need for a sign ordinance that deals with more than billboards. And overall, I actually think this version of the draft is pretty good. There's maybe a few details where I want to dig into potential changes, but I agree with Commissioner Scavdall that keeping it fairly simple is a virtue here, and having a pathway that is purely administrative, that's very cheap and easy and fast for hopefully most signs, and having some pathway for considering those cases that fall outside of those is also desirable, and I think this does capture both of those pathways. So, Commissioner West.
I just had a quick follow-up question for you too with your conversation with Mr. Wills. We didn't receive any further public comment from him or anybody else since the previous meeting, but I was curious if you had heard anything more from him about the updated.
No, fair question, and no, I haven't, and I was honestly surprised that there wasn't any additional comment received from him through any channel that I'm aware of. As Brian said, it was mostly eye-opening in that he pointed out how some of the particular limitations on monument signs and appurtenant signs, how that would square with various well-known signs in like McKinleyville. You know, just sort of showing us on the screen, like, this one is these dimensions, and under this version of the ordinance, it would be prohibited, or at least it would require a special permit, and do we want that, you know? But again, to your question, no, I haven't had any further contact, and I'm not aware of any further comment. Let me just ask you, Mr. Dunn, have you had any further?
I haven't received comment particularly. I did ask Jeff Wills to provide me with maybe some sample sizes of signs that could be helpful. And yesterday I did get a picture of some things that he wrote down in terms of like ideas for signage. So there are pictures that I received. I'm sorry that I didn't print those out or provide it to you guys tonight, but it was, you know, it was something we had spoken about earlier on, and he had considered sending it to me, and we talked about it back and forth of, you know, how to address that. So that is something I received yesterday, just so that everyone's aware.
Okay. Do we want to go to public comment now at this stage? I mean,
I have questions, but they can certainly wait until after public comment.
maybe that would be good. I'm actually not able to see the, while you're screen sharing, I don't seem to be able to see who is on Zoom or phone and may have hands raised. Okay, now I can see it. There's a couple people on Zoom. We do have one person in the room, so let me just first open it up to you, ma'am. Would you be interested in commenting on this ordinance?
No, well, perhaps later, but not on that particular.
Well, I think this is kind of the point where we're going to invite public comment on this item. If you had anything you wanted to comment on any aspect of the signs and billboards ordinance, now would be the time.
Maybe I can just say,
If you could come up to the mic, just so you can be heard and seen by our remote audience as well.
I'm Michelle McKeegan, and I am in charge of Keep Eureka Beautiful, which is an all-volunteer organization. And what we do, by and large, is plant street trees. But there is a real concern about this issue, and I guess I was hoping Jennifer would be here to speak, because she is better she knows more about this issue than I. But I do very much want us to look at things like digital, and I do want us to be pretty darn conservative, because people really do hate billboards, and they really do hate digital ones. And so nobody is here to say that but me, but it is the case. So that's all I have to say, that I would really like to see it as conservative as we can get it, and certainly to as large.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Seeing no other,
Chair, if I could, you may just want to invite people that are on Zoom. There are 2 people there
Yeah.
to raise their hands if they want to say
oh,
something.
yeah. No, I'm going to. I was just going to say there's no other people in the room, so I'm going to now turn to Zoom. We have 2 participants on Zoom, Jeanette and Jen Colt. If either of you would like to comment, I would ask you to raise your hand. Okay, I see a hand up for Jen Colt, so I will go ahead and recognize you, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Is there a way to unmute my camera? I don't know, but sorry I couldn't be there in person. I woke up with a cold yesterday, so figured I would spare everyone the coughing and whatnot. I guess I'm a little confused about where this process is at this point, because there's been so many hearings scheduled, and then we didn't get to the sign ordinance, or and there's been changes made. But I hope that you've seen our comment letter about this. You know, I'm the director of Humboldt Waterkeeper, I should say, and we have been involved in many hearings about billboards over the years, including countless hearings at the general plan update, where, you know, dozens of people spoke about the need to ban off-site billboards, ban lighted billboards, ban digital billboards, especially, you know, in the coastal zone. That is really the top priority for my organization, is banning billboards in the coastal zone. As you probably know, most of the billboards that were built in the coastal zone are built on wetlands or other environmentally sensitive habitat areas, or agricultural lands where they would never be allowed to be built today, and many of them predate the policies and regulations that cover them today. And so there have been billboards that fell down, and there were huge uproars over, you know, having hearings to issue permits to rebuild them. And the last one was down in the Elk River south of Eureka. And at the time, Supervisor Bass indicated that she really wanted to see the county implement the sign ordinance that was called for in 2017 when the general plan update was adopted, so that we wouldn't have these, you know, sign by sign battles. So we did submit this comment letter talking about the need for specificity in the lighting standards. And, you know, a lot of our comments are modeled after the city of Eureka's excellent ordinance that was adopted. And so I don't know if you're at the point to be taking very specific comments about, section number, blah, blah, blah. But I just came into this hearing and was expecting a little bit more of a presentation. I guess that was a couple months ago and I may have missed that, so sorry about that. But thank you for giving me the time to speak and allowing it to be on Zoom since I'm not feeling that great. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your comment and for your letter, which we received and is in the record. There's one other person on Zoom. That's Jeanette. I just wanted to see if by any chance you wish to make a comment on this item. Oh, okay. I'm not seeing a hand raising there, so we will go ahead and close public comments and bring it back to the staff and commission for further discussion. Okay, I mean, I have just a couple of questions that I thought might be good to have you go over, Mr. Dunn. One is, are there any differences in substance at all between the inland version and the coastal version of the ordinance?
There is, sorry, let me check what section it is. There is a,
And now that we've gotten through the public comment, if you want to go back to screen sharing, feel free. That might be helpful if you're gonna look at any particular provisions.
okay. The one provision that I know is a little bit different because it already existed prior. Let me share that screen. It would be this directional sign section here, which I did not change. I did not make any edits to. So that one stands, and any other, all these other sections are taken from, or exactly similar to the inland portion, but the difference is that the permit requirement is for a coastal development permit instead of a special permit.
Yes, Commissioner West, did you have your hand up?
Yes, but it can wait till after. Are we done with that
Well,
question?
so the directional signs provision, just forgive me because I just don't have the coastal one. That only exists in the coastal version, not in the inland version, correct?
That is correct.
And why is that?
Personally, I don't have a reason particularly. I was working with what was existing within the inland portion and made revisions that we thought were necessary for the inland portion. This is just something that had been approved prior in the coastal version, so I don't know if there was a particular
Okay.
reason.
This could absolutely be added into the inland area too.
Uh-huh. See, it seems to make comments, I mean, it seems to make sense to me. It seems like a beneficial provision. Obviously, the coastal version of the ordinance will have to go through coastal commission review and approval.
Right.
And we know that led to certain changes, or I understand from the process of the drafting of the Eureka ordinance that there were certain things that were changed at the coastal commission's request or direction. So, but if this one, it seems like something that might be fairly uncontroversial and beneficial to both. Well, I had another.
I would just say
Yeah.
the one thing that this is an off-site sign. So one of the things that particularly inland ordinance, but the coastal version too, is saying is now off-site signs are prohibited. So you know, I just do want you to struggle a little bit with that concept. Normally, off-site signage is just not something that's allowed. Directional signs can be permitted, but then it does become an off-site sign. Where do you allow them to be? And a lot of old sign ordinances that had directional signs were written before Caltrans started to have the off-ramp signage outside of cities, so people would know what's at the off-ramp. And so I just want that to be something for you to think about.
Thank you. Commissioner West? If you had a different question, topic, or whatever, I think we're sort of wide open at this point, so.
Great, okay. I wanted to kind of track what some of the public commenters were saying and address some of their questions. I think to Jen Calt's question, can we clarify for the public where we are in the process?
Yes. You know, really, we're ready to start going through the ordinance if you are. I think based upon the comments that we received last time, at least it was my concern interpretation that the commission wasn't really interested in working on a sign ordinance that went as far as the ordinance that is proposed went. And so if the commission's not interested in doing that, we wanted that question to be answered up front so that we could minimize the pain and get right to what the general plan really requires to be done, which is to address billboards. So I think at this point, we're ready to walk through the ordinance, walk through the billboard provisions, walk through the other appurtenant sign provisions, the restrictions that exist, and see where you're at. If you want us to take a different look at it, to more mimic, say, City of Eureka, you know, it'd probably be good to do that before we try to start wordsmithing an ordinance. And that's why we were asking the kind of the global questions first.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to say that the billboard provision is, in my mind, more urgent and something that I think will have less time spent massaging. And so I'm not necessarily asking to bifurcate this into two policies, but I would think that we could implement the parts related to billboards much quicker. And so I was wondering if there's a method to do that. I don't think that we're ready to wordsmith on the sign restriction piece yet. And if staff thinks that we are, we can. But I think there will be several changes.
As I mentioned, we are absolutely looking for your preference here. If you just want to talk about billboards, we're ready to talk about billboards, and we can deep six everything else. We need your direction on that. That's not our decision.
So just to respond, I think all four of us said we do want to regulate signs. And the way it's done so far, we want to change that. And go ahead.
What change do you want? That's what I'm asking. If you don't like what we've written, if you don't like the approach, tell us how you want it restructured, and we will go and do that. I mean, that's really what we need to understand.
So I believe that the majority of signs, or more specifically, signs that are similar or exactly the same as signs that already exist in a given community, should be allowed to go through without a discretionary process. Signs that would be blinking red or something that would be dangerous or outside what's already existing in a community should. And I don't know that going and saying countywide you can build a sign, you know, this tall and this wide and have this many font sizes that we would get the result that I was looking for. So perhaps just brainstorming here, if the first step was to go to the zoning administrator, he could approve it, or she, if it was a reasonable sign as determined by more open-ended policy guidance. If it falls outside of sort of what's existing in that community, then it kicks it to a discretionary process. I don't think that the way we've done it here, at least the specifics of how tall and how wide work in every community.
Yes, Commissioner West.
And I think maybe this is the nut of what staff is asking is, I think I differ a little bit from you on, I like also going with an administrative process and a discretionary process and keeping things kind of clean, but I would like to see some more clarity on what is and isn't allowed, and do some regulation on size and electronic and lights and those sort of things. So perhaps it merits more of a discussion among us. I think I like where we're going with what staff has written, and my comments pertain mostly to adding to and tweaking some of what's there. And I have a lot of questions.
I guess my comment would basically be that I think the best way to figure out how close we feel you are with this draft is probably to go through it, in detail, and have a chance to, bless you, and so have a chance to figure out which parts of this specifically any of us may want to amend or see revisions to. So since we've all agreed that we think we don't just want to deep six the signs section of this ordinance, we do want to take that on. I believe that seems to be pretty clear consensus. So I think we just should get into going through the details and see where we may have particular questions or concerns.
I have his screen sharing, so it should be able to come up here.
Okay. Thank you.
Would you like me to zoom at all?
Yeah, I think if you could blow that up just a little bit, that's, so you can, yeah, something like that, I think is probably as big as you can have it, so.
Yeah. Just to note, through the chair, anything that's highlighted has been changed since the first draft was proposed at the first public hearing.
Right, okay.
So you want to walk through the changes that were made here?
Yeah, so here we made some changes just based on the comments that were brought forward about the purpose statement and regarding the economically viable business serving county residents, and as well as the free flow of traffic and things like that. So we narrowed it down to really tackle what the purpose of this ordinance is, which is to allow signage that protects the public health, safety, and welfare, and allows signs of appropriate scale and design compatible with the setting. So that narrows it down so that it's very straightforward and is particular to what the point of making a sign ordinance is.
Yes, Commissioner Scaville?
So if we're to the point of wordsmithing, and at the risk of wordsmithing a little bit, but I don't think that the signs that we're talking about in this ordinance actually protect public health, safety, and welfare. And maybe it's semantics, but it would read better to me if we say that we are allowing signage that is not detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare. If nobody has an acceptance to that.
I do agree with you. I think that's a better way of putting it. Mr. Dunn, is there anything more you wanted to say about why those other sections of the purpose were removed? And I think it's, am I correct in assuming that that's based on what you took to be the commission's feedback when we had a discussion of this last time?
I
Is that
think the director and I both felt that that was the direction.
okay? Yes, Commissioner West, and then Commissioner Mitchell.
I remember we went around a little bit about this one as a commission, and I think personally, I appreciate you trying to take a stab at what I heard were some very different points of view on the purpose. As it reads right now, I feel uncomfortable with the part appropriate scale and design compatible with the setting. Compatible with the setting is very broad, and who decides the compatibility? What is the setting? There's not a lot of clarity or teeth there. You could use that sentence to back up pretty much any argument you were making.
Commissioner Mitchell.
So, I guess I disagree with both of the previous comments. I like the way one is written. I think that the spirit of it could be rewritten. I think that has signage that doesn't distract drivers, essentially. And I know that could be encapsulated in two, but I think there's two different points between distracting signs and the consistency with the existing community character. So that's my
Commissioner
comments.
West.
I think you put that well. That I think the nut of it for me is, I think distracting and then protecting community character, and for me that includes view sheds in the night sky and the community character.
So, I mean, Commissioner West, if I can just ask a follow-up to you about section, or, item 2, allow signs that are of appropriate scale and design compatible with the setting. I take your point that that's pretty broad and pretty subjective. But I guess I'm just wondering if you had a particular idea of how to make that a little bit more specific or offer more concrete guidance, bearing in mind that, this is the purpose. So this is the sort of most general statement about the whole thing that we're going to have in this ordinance. But
To answer your question, I liked what we had before, which was compatible with nearby development and landscape.
I see. Yes, you're preferring the previous version of the
Just
language.
slightly more clarity and
Okay.
definition to it. Personally, I know that I think the trick of this whole thing, it sounds like what I'm understanding is that we're all going to have to come to a little bit of consensus so that staff can take it and run with it.
I also liked the statement, supporting business, which largely these signs are for.
Yeah.
They're on businesses or for businesses, and I think a lot of time we are accused of making things harder for business. I would like to see something in there regarding the purpose of this ordinance is to support business. Serve the
Yes.
county residents.
Okay. Commissioner Mitchell.
We did discuss number 4 a good deal, and I don't think anyone said that they didn't want to support economically viable businesses. But what we saw was policies that potentially wouldn't do that, because so many of the signs that already exist in the county would have been required to go through a discretionary process. So I believe if we get the specifics in the policy right, that 4 will be something that it does. So I agree that I liked 2 the way it was. 3 should be added back, and 4.
So, Commissioner Mitchell, you've made a couple comments that just causing me pause. I want to be clear, is this ordinance addressing all existing signage or future signage?
No. Future.
Okay. Because a couple of your comments were about, matching signs that already exist or not causing problems for existing businesses. But if we're only talking about future signs going forward, I don't see how this would impact current businesses.
Okay. May I address that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Okay. So my comments about existing signs are that, for the most part, other than billboards and signs in the coastal zone, I don't hear many complaints or discussion about there being a lot of problematic signs in the county. And so when I take a look at the proposed, guidelines and then try to conceptualize what would that look like in terms of height, the height that would be allowed under a over-the-counter permit, many of the signs in McKinleyville would never have been able to go that route. They would have had to go through that. And I don't think it's fair to make new businesses spend money and go through a lot of additional processes when we already have stuff like that. So that's why I'm bringing in the past. I think that it should be the ones that would stand out like a sore thumb. So roughly 80-20 or whatever we want to decide, but that most of the signs are done without a discretionary process. That's the goal, my goal for this.
Thanks. I appreciate that clarification.
Absolutely.
Commissioner West?
I know we're talking about purpose, but we've delved off a little bit into existing signs versus future signs. So I just want to toss it in there while we're talking about it. We are a little bit talking about existing signs, particularly when we talk about billboards, and I do hope that we discuss what to do about non-conforming signs, particularly digital signs, and a little bit how to tackle those moving forward. So I do hope that we have a discussion that includes existing signs, but I do hear your comments about it is always a balance. Like, not everybody had to go through the permitting process, but at some time you do have to update policies, and that does impact future and new signs and changes how things go.
So we obviously interpreted the commission's comments on the purpose statement to want more simplicity there, to not be so broad and inclusive. If you want to go back to the way it was before, we can certainly do that. That's easy enough to do. I think that part of the reason that we also asked a big overarching general question up front is that if you'd just like more kind of regulatory definition in the sign ordinance, but basically allowing what's already allowed, then that would be a good statement to make. That would allow us to go away and work on refining this. This admittedly does, from an administrative process, reduce what would be allowed with an administrative permit intentionally. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because that's where most communities are going, is that they are not allowing the same size signs that were allowed in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. And so it reduces the light pollution, reduces visual clutter, creates cleaner lines on buildings, creates better design. And that is a very intentional objective in what staff has presented to you. But if that's not where you want to go, it would be good to know that early. And so that we can, adapt to that.
Commissioner Mitchell?
So I feel that it could go one of two directions to meet the overarching objectives that we've expressed. One is that someone like a design review committee or commission decides whether or not that sign fits in that particular area. Now, that would be very subjective. And
Yeah, I want to say, that would be a very bad idea, because we would then be very arbitrary and subjective. And one of the things that then happens is that opens the county up to all kinds of liability.
I tried to include that in my statement, that that would be very subjective.
Okay,
And
sorry.
so the other way could be to have each community planning area, either through the community planning process or staff looking at it by community planning area, set criteria that reflect what exists in that community or what is acceptable in that community. Because something that is acceptable in McKinleyville or Cutton might be completely inappropriate for a small community like Garberville or Redway. And if we set the bar for what the smallest community would find acceptable, then the majority of the signs would have to fall outside of that streamlined process. So I guess what I'm asking for is, could you give us some options to achieve our overarching objective for the policy, and we can say, this sounds like it would work.
I'm asking the commission to tell us what your overarching objectives are. I'm not clear on where this commission wants to go.
Yeah.
Commissioner West and then Commissioner Scabdell.
I think I'll say again, like, I lean towards coming up with some objective standards that are fairly conservative for signs to apply to the whole county, that go through an administrative process. And then when you have signs that are deviate from that for whatever reason, then it goes through a level of discretionary process. It doesn't mean it's a no, it merits a higher level of consideration. And to a process point, I'm wondering if maybe, since I hear a little bit of a difference of opinions among us, if maybe we could bring back the what we used for the short-term rentals, where staff came up with several alternatives, and then we were able to sort of workshop from there. If you're hearing disparate opinions, perhaps that might be a way to come to some consensus.
Commissioner Scabdell?
After listening to Commissioner Mitchell and kind of going through this a little bit more, I'm starting to lean back towards the, if it's not broken, why are we fixing it? And maybe what I'm hearing is we need to focus on billboards and digital signs. And I just kind of give you an example, having worked with somebody that just, bought a business, happened to be in the city of Fortuna, but there was an existing pole sign there, had some other business name on it. The simple thing to do was simply change the name on a pole sign to the new business name. If these types of regulations existed, the sign would have had to come down, a new dimension would have had to been formed and built out, and it would have cost that business a lot more money to develop a different sign versus use the existing sign. So I'm just trying to understand, if we come up with these guidance, that's what we're doing. Every time a business changes, they wouldn't be able to reuse the sign from the 1950s or whatever might be there, perhaps, if it didn't meet these dimensions.
Director Ford?
Yeah, I would disagree with that. If a sign's there, a face change does not require the sign to come into compliance.
It doesn't. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll be clear about that.
Okay, yeah, that's an important question, but yeah.
When the sign comes down, or if it's been left untended for a prolonged period of time, at that point, there are provisions in these new regulations that would require it to be addressed somehow. But say there's a vacant tenant space that sits there for a time, for a time, that sign would not need to be changed. It's just, that's the normal ebb and flow of retail space. So that
Okay.
sign would be fine.
So even if that sign exceeded the dimensional requirements
Right.
of the current standard,
That's an existing legal sign.
Okay.
Face changes do not invalidate that.
okay? That's an important clarification. Thank you.
Is that clear in the language of the ordinance?
We could make that more clear.
I think that would be good, because I was not clear on that. Yes, Commissioner West.
When you do talk about non-conforming signs, personally, I've seen sometimes the window for a sign not being tended, like Director Ford mentioned, not being tended to. There's a period of time if the business has moved out and the sign is just left empty or old. I think Eureka's, I probably am misquoting this, but it was somewhere around 90 days. And that is maybe not, I would be supportive of a longer period of time to give a new business wiggle room to put up a new sign before they lose that non-conforming grandfathered in golden ticket.
If I may, through the chair.
Yes, Mr. Dunn.
Currently, for obsolete signs, any appurtenant sign face identifying a use or activity that has not occupied the site for more than 6 months.
Sorry, where are you
Thank you.
reading from?
That is
Exact-
underneath the prohibited sign section.
Prohibited
So that would be
signs,
section 87.
obsolete signs. Okay, any pertinent sign face identifying a use or activity that has not occupied the site for more than 6 months. That's what defines it becoming obsolete. Any off-premise sign face advertising an activity that has not taken place for more than 6 months. Okay. Okay. Well, I do just, I mean, I think I agree with Commissioner West that to the extent that we can even identify the clear breakpoints in our feedback or our opinions here, it would be really helpful to call that out and ask the staff to come back with alternatives on that point. Just on the purpose, I'm not hearing a great deal of support for the changes that were made, and it seems like more of us are actually leaning towards most, if not all, of what was in the original version. I think I take the point that there was a lot of discussion about this when we had an earlier hearing, but for me, I think having the purpose be broader and more inclusive makes sense here. I basically would support adding back in, personally, most of what was cut. I was okay with provision 2, but I kind of appreciate what Commissioner West said about being a little bit more specific rather than just the setting. I agree with Commissioner Scavdall that saying something about provision 4, supporting economically viable business, that feels like it needs to be addressed as part of the purpose here. And given that some of these provisions do seem to be specifically concerned with avoiding distractions and provision 3, while in a way is sort of a more specific version of provision 1, I think it has a purpose. So how do we feel about just having it go back to what was there before? Okay. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. So do we now want to go on to, we could certainly talk about any changes that were made, but that I don't want to skip over the opportunity to address,
I would ask that perhaps we just go through it section by
just
section.
go through it all. Okay, yeah, let's go through it all. Sure, why not?
Yeah, so going down, the next section is applicability, which, I mean, this is pretty standard language there. I don't know if you guys really want to get into that.
So just, I think.
Or should we just get
Jacob,
down to
walk
nameplates?
through and just describe what a nameplate is and what these apply to so that
Okay.
everybody's clear on what we're talking about.
Okay. So nameplates, they're limited to a statement of the name, address, and occupational designation of the occupant. So it's something you would see next to an entrance for someone's doorway on a business. They're not meant to be displays from the road per se. A lot of this is the same language that existed beforehand, and it's just been reformatted, and nameplates has been given more of a definition there. So.
Commissioner Mitchell?
I actually had a comment on the applicability section. I wondered if this wouldn't be an opportunity to list the few points where existing signs would need to come into compliance potentially for the billboards and the digital signs and others that would be distracting. I'm sure that will be specifically dealt with in those sections, but the fact that most signs that don't fit under those categories wouldn't have to go back and do anything in terms of the grandfathered in status, but that some will, I would think that'd be a good place to highlight that.
Well, applicability really is a simple statement. And it's just, these regulations apply to all signs in all zoning districts, or if you're going to exclude some signs or some areas, this is where that would be found. Other regulations, non-conforming provisions, that's addressed down further.
Okay.
Okay. That makes that, I see your point, Commissioner Mitchell, but I think what Director Ford is saying makes sense. So maybe we'll see we'll see where we get to the later parts where we deal with non-conforming or prohibited signs. So
Go down to temporary signs.
Okay. This one's separated into 2 pages, but one of the changes that we made here was we increased the square footage for temporary signage to 32 square feet, as well as some of the timelines for installation and removal. So this one for strings and banners and things like that, that was made to 30 and 10 days after. Going down, we have political signs. That was changed from 15 days to 90 days prior, and from 15 days after to 10 days after. And for temporary signs advertising special events, that has been increased from 15 days to 30 days, and for removal from 15 to 10.
any thoughts or comments on those provisions? Okay, yeah, I appreciate that you've made those a little bit more lenient, and, yeah, okay.
So going down here, we have property sale signage, which, again, hasn't changed much. There's a more of a defined section here for advertising the sale of property, and then below is the permitting requirements,
Actually, it's not even permitting, it's
or
just allowance.
allowances, actually.
Okay,
Nothing
Yep.
there?
Pertinent signs?
So we'll go down to appurtenant signs, and I think this is probably going to be where a lot of contention might be. So this is for any appurtenant sign that identifies or advertises a place of business or product. And these regulations here give the allowances and the permit requirements. And so this is also in collaboration with the table, which would be 87, section 87.2.6.5. So principally permitted signage for commercial and industrial zoning districts will have to be consistent with the table, and consistent with the zoning and general plan the land use designation. And for all other zones, this was what had previously been written in, and what was changed was it went from conditional use permit to special permit. So where you see anything that says special permit, previously it had said conditional use permit. And so that has been changed as well.
I want to make sure I'm understanding this. Yes, Commissioner West, you have a question?
It's not a question. I think it's just as good a time as any to mention that I really like, I think I talked about this last time, but the creative sign permit that Eureka has, I like these general sideboards, and then I would like to see us develop an alternative pathway for when folks want to do something that's thoughtful, that's a little bit outside of the box. This is a really good box, but I'd like to see us have a pathway for outside of the box. And I think Eureka does a good job of allowing for that and making it so that it's a quality sign that comes out of the process with a creative sign policy.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Mitchell?
I would say that I would certainly support that, but would also point out that the city of Eureka has a design review committee, and to my understanding, we don't have a design review committee for the county, writ large, and we would need to find out who or whom we would task with that, or who the board would task with that.
Did you want to respond to that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it could go to the zoning administrator, or it doesn't necessarily have to be to this body, but just a discretionary body of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, yeah, that is one of the things that I liked about the Eureka ordinance as well. But Commissioner Mitchell, you make a good point. We would have to be, since we don't have that discretionary mechanism that Eureka has, we would have to be clear about how that would work. So I don't know if this is where that fits necessarily, but I think you've sort of heard us indicate an interest in that.
For sake of clarity, I'm hearing the commission would like to see us add in the creative sign provisions similar to what Eureka has. Maybe come back with options for how that gets reviewed.
Yes. Great.
And if I may, with a question for clarity as well, is in regard to requirements, would it be sizing? Are we talking in particular, what characteristics, I guess, for that permit would need review? Okay.
Commissioner West, and then Commissioner Mitchell.
And I think in my vision of a creative sign permit, it would allow for, I particularly think of I think of more artistic signs. I don't necessarily support creative signs creating a pathway for electronic and digital signs.
Commissioner Mitchell?
And I would add to that, because I agree entirely that we don't want an end run around that, and I don't know how to write this in policy language, but if the sign is consistent with the community character, even though it might be slightly taller or different, but it still fits, then it should go through. So I'd love to hear how we could do that within policy.
So I think that's saying something a little bit different than the sort of creative sign pathway then, right? I mean, although I don't know exactly what the objective marker of creative sign is, but it tends to be those that are more artistically ambitious or something like that. At least that's how I interpreted it. Whereas what I think I heard you say, Commissioner Mitchell, was if it's bigger, if it's oversized or otherwise out of compliance with these guidelines, but still consistent with its surroundings, with the context of other signs, we want there to be a pathway for it to occur.
Let me restate what I'm trying to get at. If it's following the guidelines set forth in Eureka's creative sign ordinance, it's a creative way to do the sign, but it can't be permitted under the parameters that we set.
I see.
Then the test should be the person or body that's deciding that should have a way to determine if it's it's similar but different in some way, then it should pass.
I see. Then the discretionary body considering it should look at the surrounding context of other.
Yes, but
Signs.
since we can't just have a test that says, does it look good, because that's so subjective, I'd like to have that thought process turned into a policy checklist.
Okay. And yet, Commissioner West?
I think Eureka does have a fair amount of that in the creative signs, or they do give like materials of higher quality, like it must check 3 of more of the following, then it gets the list of like, over 12 different like considerations. So it's like, is it creative and unique, and is it projecting, recessed, or cut out text? It's meant to support high quality signs, and there are some considerations in there for that. So that might I hope get at what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the only reason I even add that test language is because we don't have a design review committee. If we did, we could just, in my mind, use Eureka's exactly. But we don't.
We don't.
And so I don't know if we could deputize a staff member or a subgroup of us or a different committee altogether, but someone or some group needs to decide whether or not that's actually a quality sign and actually something that they would approve.
Just so I make sure I'm understanding, you're suggesting that so like we pick somebody, and then you're asking for as much as we can objective standards or findings to be made beyond it looks good, right?
Yes.
Which I still think some of those criteria that the Eureka ordinance has could be good examples of that. So, yeah. And just before we move on from where we are on the screen, so in all other zones, just what the way I'm reading this is, in the commercial or industrial zone districts and unclassified, signs shall be principally permitted. But does that imply that they still must meet the considerations, the requirements that follow? Correct. Okay.
Yes.
Whereas in the next one under subsection 3, in all other zones, it then specifies that up to 3 single-sided signs or 1 double-sided and 1 single-sided, not over 75 square feet aggregate, shall be permitted with a special permit. So for any signs, as I read this, outside of, in those other zones besides commercial or industrial, any sign will require a special permit?
That is correct. Previously, it was with a use permit for any
Okay.
zone.
Okay.
Outside of specified zones.
Okay, I'm not objecting, I just want to make sure I'm interpreting this properly.
So one of the things, if I could, Chair, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, please.
You're going to see, the Planning Commission is going to see a sign come forward. We wanted to have it on the same night as this for context, but there is a sign for a church, residential zone. So what do you do with that? Currently, that's a conditional use permit.
Right. Okay. Commissioner Mitchell, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in the discussion of 87.2.6.2, a question. It talks about unclassified zoning districts. And while this policy makes sense to me in commercial and industrial zones, my recollection was that a lot of the unclassified zoned land was intended to be rezoned so that it wasn't, and a lot of it was more timberlands. But I guess I'm wondering, is unclassified going away or supposed to be going away through the rezoning?
Well, unclassified should not be a permanent zoning district. You are absolutely correct. And we are working towards addressing that to bring those sites into compliance with the general plan. I don't know, I mean, I guess we could say that they're all going to go away and we could take it out of the sign ordinance. But I would hate to say that and have a business in an unclassified zone not be able to get signage. And so that's why it's addressed there, because even though it may be underlying timberland, it may be underlying ag land, there may be a use there that has been permitted and continues to exist there that needs or wants signage for their operation.
And it's modified by what the language that was added that specifically says when accompanied by commercial services or industrial general land use designation. So that would seem to narrow it down to exclude some other unclassified zone properties.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, I mean, this is an important preliminary section. Any other questions on this, or should we move on? And
It's up there.
I will just note, it's about 7:25, so in maybe 5 more minutes, we'll take a break, as we usually do. Yes, Commissioner Mitchell?
I just wanted to ask about the 87.2.6.3, where the number 3 comes from, and the specific size, where that comes from, and also, is that per parcel, per individual building on a parcel, per ownership?
That would be per parcel, and the sizes have come from the previous language. So the previous language stated all other zones, or, let's see, let me pull.
It
up
just
the
says
actual
up to 3. One of the keys to reading an ordinance that's being modified is anything that's underlined is new text. Anything that is stricken is old text that's being deleted. Anything that is text that has neither underline nor strikeout is from the old ordinance. It's not sacred to us. We just rolled it forward.
I guess I would like to see something that would be different for a large parcel with a number of buildings, might be able to accommodate more than 3 single-sided signs. But a very small, building on a small lot, may not. So I would like to see us change it so that it was not one size fits all.
Commissioner West?
I think that's what we were trying to get at with the master sign plan a little bit. Do you feel like the master sign plan addresses your concerns, or do you feel like the master sign plan needs to?
If we, in fact, have specific language for that. It very well could.
Well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but yeah.
I just have a question about 87.2.6.4. I'm fine with signs not consistent with the next section. 6.5 shall be, perhaps I should say may be permitted with a special permit. But then it goes on to define. Sorry, then we go on to define more about the sign, and I'm not, that's confusing to me. So maybe you can scroll down so we can see the whole paragraph there.
The question is why do there need to be parameters for that when you're already requiring a discretionary permit?
Correct. And we have a lot of details in section 6.5 about all different types of signs. So signs not consistent with the whole sign table, it could be any type of a sign that may not be consistent with that. So it seemed to me we just say signs not consistent with section 87.2.6.5 may be permitted with a special permit.
I think that's fine. But unfortunately, one of the things we tried not to do was completely throw out all the language from the existing ordinance, and that's a remnant, but I
Okay.
completely get what you're saying. It probably makes sense just to take away that encumbrance.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
Thank you.
Well, maybe we should take a break right now. It's 7:29, so why don't we take 10 minutes, and then we'll get back into it. Thank you. Yep, so let's reconvene now, and Mr. Dunn, if you would proceed from where you were just before the break.
Of course. So I guess we'll get down into the table now. And moving down to the table, we'll start up at the top with monument signs and projecting and banner signs. Put it in a spot where it shows all of it.
So if I could, one of the things that the commission should probably struggle with is that we have defined these as monument signs in terms of being principally permitted, rather than like the typical freestanding, or like Eureka calls them pole signs. So, you know, typically freestanding signs can come in very different forms. You can have a monument sign, which is intended to be a far more low-profile identifier, and then you all the way up to very large signs that can really dominate, you know, the frontage of a piece of property.
So this was one question I have. It did say monument and freestanding. You took away the freestanding. And I realize that whichever of those words is used, I'm not really clear on the difference. And Director, maybe that's what you were speaking to, but a monument sign is not a sign that is elevated on one or two poles? It's different from that?
Typically not. It's typically, there's just a good illustration of it.
Okay, right.
So a monument sign is something that typically sits on a pedestal. And it's a lower profile sign.
And in that example there, since it is a little small, the deli and market, is that sitting on,
The deli and market sign over on the right, the upper right,
oh, the upper right, that's a freestanding sign.
That's a freestanding
Yes.
sign.
The
Or-
monument sign on the left, though, what, is that sitting on the roof of the building?
No, it's sitting on a small pedestal that would be located on the ground.
On the ground, okay.
I think that depicts grass or some.
Okay, yeah, that's sitting on grass.
And the scale between the freestanding sign and the monument sign are completely off. Because if you could try to envision the face of the sign being approximately the same size. And
Okay.
then, the one is lower to the ground and is more of a human scale. The other can be elevated well off the ground. One of the things that I would encourage you to do as you consider signs is walk around and stand next to signs, or drive down the road and say, okay, does this sign need to be this high and this big in order to fulfill its purpose? I mean, we want to advertise, we want people to be known and seen, and to have the public be able to identify that, yep, they're in the right place. But, there's kind of an old, the old idea of signage is that the higher, the bigger, the more dominant the signs are, the more business you will do. And that probably was true at one point. But I know for, like, many people, most of their signage is probably 1.5 inches by 4 inches. They hold it in their hand, and they decide where they're going to go. And so the signage really isn't to draw people in, it's to say, you've arrived at the right place. So what do
Sure.
you need to do that?
But can you explain why we've gone from having freestanding signs of some dimension be principally permitted to now having them all require a special permit?
Because we are proposing that we are intentionally trying to kind of reduce the scale of the signage that's principally allowed. And that's a policy decision. That's why I'm calling it out for your discussion. Is that is the way this is intentionally written, and that is a policy decision for the commission to pass on to the board. If you're not in agreement with that, then that is something that should be discussed. And the size of the sign, what's appropriate. I mean, I think that the placeholders are here for those discussions. And then whatever size you want to put in there, and whatever definition you want to put in there, the discussion points are there.
Oh, okay, so I saw Commissioner West and then Commissioner Scavdall, sorry.
I appreciate teasing out freestanding signs from monument signs. I think freestanding signs, or what I think of as a pole sign, are one of the hardest signs to fit into the community, the viewshed fabric of an area. They are, you can design them well, but they're objectively, in my brain, hard to make aesthetically pleasing and fit with what I think of as a rural county and small town communities. They are aesthetically challenging oftentimes. So I appreciate having a higher level of review associated with them personally.
Commissioner Scavdall.
Yeah, and I just, again, want to make sure I understand this table that we're looking at with all these sign types and then the sign requirements. Those are the requirements to get a permit in a commercial and industrial zone that are principally permitted. You could still get a sign bigger than this. You just need you would have to go through the special permit process. So we're
Right.
just setting in this table the guidelines for lack of a better word, the over-the-counter permit.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
Clear.
that's really important.
Yeah.
None of these are prohibiting what,
Right. So, and then also, when we talk about freestanding signs, or what you're calling pole signs, those signs, I would hope, require a building permit as well, because they require structural engineering and wind calculations and special foundation designs and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All, all signs require building permit,
Okay,
frankly.
they all do.
They're
Okay.
considered structures, all of them.
Okay, good, thank you.
But I just wanted to agree with what you said and add to that the duality of the fact that we are trying to come up with parameters that work not only on, you know, our half of Harrison Street, but also in Alder Point. So I think it's virtually impossible to do to achieve that objective through describing it specifically.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you did. Please, go ahead.
I have a question, but it can wait if you have thoughts on things.
I'm not sure. So,
Okay.
yeah, but go ahead.
When we're talking about sign types, I particularly think of some signs in Eureka that I see that are good examples of big signs painted onto a building. They're not quite art, but they're not quite a sign, and I'm curious if the commission is interested in exploring policy around that.
Commissioner Mitchell.
To answer your question, I would respond with a question of if it's part art, is having regulations around it violating that artist's free expression thereof in his free speech?
I think that would be the needle we'd have to thread. And I think that there are some that are done lovely, and there are some that really take advantage of the fact that they have this big building face, and it is just their business words. And it is a giant sign that is arguably distracting and not quite in line with the character of what I think is happening, but it's a tricky one.
So there's some things that you may kind of want to struggle with a little bit. One of the things that other jurisdictions struggle with are things like corporate buildings, where the building itself is a sign. McDonald's is a classic example of that. We actually have a sign permitted right now for a building in McKinleyville that what they want to do is paint on the side of the building what all of the activities that are going on inside the building, on the outside of the building, and then use the corporate colors, which is a bright orange, for all of the trim on the building. So you would end up with all of the pilasters and all the architectural embellishment on the building being painted bright orange, and then the rest of the building would be painted to look like a mini storage.
Just a question of clarification, if that's okay.
Yes.
Would you're talking about the activities inside? Is it a picture or is it words?
No, it's a picture,
It's a picture. Okay.
but it raises the question. I mean, here's a real life example. I should have it electronically, but I don't. Is that, do you really want a mini storage painted onto the side of a building? That absolutely is a sign. And Commissioner Mitchell raises a good point. If you allow signage, you know, we can regulate the size, shape of a sign, but you can't regulate content.
And I hate to sound like a broken record, but that type of thing is so difficult to predict. What are they going to think of next? But a design review style of body can say, no, that is not in the context of our community, nor what we hope it will look like. No. So I hope that we have some sort of that essence, if you will, in what comes forth.
Yeah, I think, just in fairness, the question was, do you even want to consider that? And I'm what I'm trying to do is, as you think about whether or not you want to consider that, understanding what we may be confronted with as we go forward.
Yes, Commissioner West.
I think it's a really good question to chew on. Sorry to bring up Eureka's code again. So there is a section in there that says murals, decorations, and design elements on the exterior of a building that do not advertise a product, business, or service are not considered signs and are not subject to the requirements of this section. Advertisement includes text displaying the name of a business, text displaying the name of a product, text publicizing a service, business-specific logos, and product-specific logos. And that, to me, does a pretty good job of like drawing that line that without stepping on freedom of speech.
Well, as I hear that, they're saying that's not a sign.
Unless it's advertisement, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to paint a mural on the side of a building, please, go for it.
And even if that mural is displaying the services that are offered.
No, it says that if you're displaying the services, you don't, it's a sign.
I didn't quite catch that. Text describing the sign, the services.
Do you mind if I read it again?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Advertisement includes text displaying the name of a business, text displaying the name of a product, text publicizing a service, business-specific logos, and product-specific logos.
So just to take this case in point, I don't think what Director Ford described is logos.
It's not
Doesn't sound
logos,
like it,
but
no.
it is the service.
Oh, is it with text?
No.
No, I hear
It's-
the language that Commissioner West read pretty much says text doing any of these things that are sort of
Yeah.
commercially relevant or logos of the business or the product.
I would submit you would want to go a little bit beyond that.
Yeah.
And think about, you don't want a picture of what service is actually being offered.
Yeah, I think that ought to be considered a sign, is what I'm saying. I'm just not sure it technically meets the definition of what you read. So, yes, Commissioner Mitchell?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I agree with that. I wanted to say that I agree with you that type of almost wall-to-wall advertisement in another form should be regulated. And the question is how exactly, but I think that you should give us options for regulating that type of thing.
So would the wall sign part of this table, that would apply to this case, wouldn't it?
Well, it would, because there's a limitation in terms of size. So it really wouldn't be allowed. In that particular case, they could probably do it with a if that was going to be allowed, it would be carried through under a master sign permit or a creative sign permit, which is something we're going to look at.
Okay, yes, it certainly could be under those, but I'm just trying to understand how this version in this table would apply. So it's basically saying for this scenario where that's a wall sign, what this would allow principally, what it would allow without a special permit or discretionary permit would be 90% of the width, it could be as wide as 90% of the width of the facade. It could be as high as the roof line, but the area would be limited to 1 square foot per linear foot of width. Is that what that means?
Yes.
Per linear foot of the width. So while it can be as wide as 90% of the width, it can't be nearly as high. It cannot occupy the whole area.
Well, so if you've got a building that's 100 feet wide.
Right. Just for round numbers.
You get 100 square foot of signage, which is a sign that's 5 by 20,
Yeah, that's what it would do.
or 20 by 50, or, I'm sorry, 2 by 50, not 20 by 50, 2 by 50.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So it does clearly prevent, at least without a special permit, doing anything that would be like wall-to-wall signage.
Right.
Yes, Commissioner West.
Just to briefly return to the example we had and some of the discussion I was having, I think I lean towards like the definition I read that does allow the activities being or services being offered to be pictured. As much as I don't especially love the design of that particular proposal, I do think there are a lot of examples where you could do that and it would be aesthetically pleasing and acceptable. So I'd hate to limit all instances of that just because I don't personally care for one particular.
So just maybe, is that allowed under a creative sign permit?
That is a good question. That is not how I read what I was looking at, but I would need to look at it more to really clarify.
Yeah, because I think that I think that if I'm hearing the commission correctly, there are provisions, there's a desire to see provisions to allow that kind of flexibility, maybe not by right, and maybe with a level of review to say, yep, that's appropriate, and maybe that's through the special permit. But in this table that we're looking at, these are just the simple, basic signs that are just allowed over the counter.
Yeah.
That's a very concise way to put it. Thank you.
I do think that that's where I think you're reading us correctly, though, on that. Commissioner Mitchell, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask I like the way that it's addressed in terms of the 1 square foot per linear foot conceptually, I guess, but how did we come up with that 1 square foot per linear foot? Is there anything behind that, or?
Research of other ordinances,
Okay.
and that can vary. I mean, it really depends on what the county really wants to do in terms of signage. I mean, it could be as high as 2 square feet per linear foot. You know, and so those are probably, as we go through the table, really the questions are those the appropriate numbers to place there?
Yeah, and the way my mind would judge it is trying to picture, different sizes of buildings, and then what kind of sign would that be, and then sort of how much of that building is now occupied, the face of it, how much of it is covered with sign. And at some point, a building that's 90% covered with sign is going to be distracting. And in other instances, on a larger building, it would probably take a smaller percentage to still have a sign big enough to be distracting. And so it seems like there's so much that could be subjective that I guess I'm just asking why 1-to-1. And I agree that the numbers may need to change, but I like the way that it's handled.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple, and that's one of the things that most sign ordinances are structured that way, that for administrative approvals, it's like, here's the sign area you get. And if you want to go beyond that or do something different, then it's discretionary.
Do any of you other commissioners have any concern that this revision does not allow any sort of freestanding sign of any dimension without a special permit? I mean, maybe I just haven't thought deeply enough about it, but it was not clear to me in my mind. I don't personally have a strong preference for monument over freestanding. I can certainly see the objection to really high pole signs. But if we're talking about something that has height limitations, I'm just not so clear why monument is okay and freestanding is not okay.
I'll take a stab at that.
Okay.
Because I think visually, when you're looking down a boulevard, if you can imagine the signs all being monument signs versus a viewscape of various heights, freestanding pole signs of, it's distracting. It's not very appealing. So I think, requiring a permit for those types of signs is a good idea. They also, in my view, require more maintenance.
Freestanding versus monument?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
The poles in our environment tend to rust and get really ugly very fast.
Okay.
They require maintenance and kind of special design. So I think just asking somebody to come in and get a permit and show some renderings and have an idea what those are going to look like before the permit's issued is a reasonable request.
Okay.
I guess I would, just have a discussion. I agree with all of those things being issues with that type of sign, but I could also imagine, one that's on, 2 poles or done tastefully. Instead of bare metal, it might be made of marble and, could look like Greek columns. And there could be ways that it would be, that I could set up guidelines that would make it so that it would be all right. So I guess for me, they should either all have a description or all have a qualitative assessment that it isn't distracting and it fits in. So I also agree that I don't see why that particular sign should be treated differently.
Commissioner West?
I'll just also weigh in. I think I land more with Commissioner Scavdall, where freestanding signs are, I think, particularly challenging to fit in with the view shed. And like, you could certainly be thoughtful about it, and then that's where the discretionary hearing comes about, to show that it fits in with the character of the area.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have such strong feelings that, I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts and see maybe why you have that preference. I can understand the logic. I do think that making it easiest to do the things that we feel from a policy perspective are most desirable, from a sort of scenic resources perspective, makes sense. We're not prohibiting this. It's not prohibited to do a freestanding sign. And just so I'm clear, would a special permit most likely, if there was no expressed, there would be notice of neighbors, there would be some notice to the neighboring parcels and so forth, but if no objections were expressed, it would probably be handled by the zoning administrator, correct? Is that, or would it, I guess I'm wondering what the permitting pathway would be like for these special permits.
So we're stepping out of cannabis now and back into the zoning ordinance.
Right.
And the special permit actually allows a hearing to be waived.
Yeah.
So if it's not controversial, we could send out notices.
Then-
And if nobody shows up, we send out something called a notice of intent to approve, or a NOIDA.
Got it.
And if nobody cares, then it can be approved basically administratively without a hearing.
I see. Doesn't even require the zoning administrator. Yeah.
Correct.
I see. Unless there's concerns expressed.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And then if somebody asks for a public hearing, what we typically do is weigh the concerns that are being expressed and the significance of the concerns, and deciding whether that goes to the zoning administrator or to the planning commission.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Mitchell?
So I'm looking at a I'm looking at a picture of a sign, and if I could just show the director and the others what I'm talking about. It's one in McKinleyville,
Yeah.
and it is digital, but I'm not talking about the digital part, just the fact that it's supported on 2 beams and it's raised up. That would automatically be required to go to a discretionary process.
Yep.
Correct?
Can I comment on that?
When I'm finished, I will, yes. I believe that, these types of signs in McKinleyville there's multiple of them, and they should have a way to get through without a discretionary hearing as well. I'm not sure how to get there, but that would be totally out of character for a lot of the rest of the county. So I don't see why this is different than a smaller sign on the ground, out in the rural areas. So that's my point. Thank you.
I think I know that sign that you're referring to, and it would seem that that would fall under a master sign plan because it's on a piece of property that has multiple places of business, so.
Through Eureka Natural Foods?
I don't know which sign, it was hard for me to see it from
Oh,
here,
yeah.
but I thought it was like a shopping center sign or something like that.
It's the Eureka Natural Foods
Oh, okay.
in McKinleyville. So
And I think if I could.
Yeah.
That sign base, has existed there for some time. One of the things that's a little bit unfair about McKinleyville is there is this thing called a burden area that goes up and down Central Avenue. That burden area goes all the way back to when that was 101. And it doesn't allow structures within it. So one of the things that works much better is to allow, frankly, monument signs on the street, lower profile, more of a human scale, visible immediately to the drivers. When you've got a burden area and you've got this huge setback of 25 feet, it may make sense to have a taller sign that you can see from a distance because you can't see the monument sign at the street. But is where the discretion comes in. And I think that that sign also, that particular site only has 2 users in it right now. If that's Eureka Natural Foods, it's got a gym and Eureka Natural Foods.
Oh, it does have the gym, that's right. I was forgetting that it had any other business.
But if that's a historical sign, it used to be a hardware store, the whole
Right.
building. So
I think they just actually replaced the face of that sign.
the face of it, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I know I've taken us a little bit into this whole monument and freestanding thing, but I'd like to keep us moving along so we can get through
Well,
this.
I think if I
Yeah.
could,
Oh, yeah.
it is an important decision point, and I hear too
Yeah.
saying that more comfortable with the monument sign discretion for taller signs. But
I'm,
that's not necessarily the majority.
that's certainly not, yeah, it's certainly not the majority, but I think that is where both Commissioner Mitchell and I are expressing a little bit of misgiving with not having any principally permitted path for freestanding signs, even of some modest height. And maybe that's something that we ought to just say, can we have an alternative? There's some internal division. Maybe that's something we want to bring back and have like a straw poll on or something.
Yeah, I could be on board with that and can envision if we listen to all the concerns that Commissioner Scavdall raised, if those were addressed in the criteria, I could see that being principally permitted.
Okay.
We'll bring back alternatives for freestanding and monument signs and address those separately, so it can be pick one.
Thank you.
Do you care about the projecting and banner signs?
I will just say that I feel more comfortable with this because they've been allowed somewhat bigger dimensions than what was initially proposed.
And that was actually with consultation with the sign person.
Okay.
Awning signs,
Yes, Commissioner Scavdall.
I just think there's a typo in there. I think depth projection should be 4 feet maximum, if I'm looking at that correctly. Is that?
Yeah, under an
the-
awning.
The awning projecting out
Oh,
in front of the
got it,
building.
yep.
Yeah.
That should be maximum, just a typo.
And actually, would that also, good catch, would that also be true for clearance?
the clearance has to, well, the clearance should be a minimum of 8 feet.
Oh,
But the,
clearance is minimum 8.
but the
feet. Got it.
projection should not be minimum of 4 feet.
Yeah. Okay. Clearance is minimum 8 feet. That makes sense. But
Yep.
maximum 4 feet projection. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So then we get into wall signage. And, so one of the things that's important here is that on a corner lot, so if you have 2 frontages, you get 2 wall signs. That's already there. The real question is 1 square foot per linear foot of facade. So I'm recognizing that I'm probably going to ask you an unfair question, which is that enough and what does that look like? And so I'm thinking to myself, perhaps what we really need to do is bring some pictures of a design in terms of what does it look like at 1 square foot, 1.5 square feet, 2 square feet.
Yes, Commissioner Mitchell.
I think it would be helpful to have that in a real setting, both in a rural, example and a urban example, for context.
I do think, yes, without wanting to burden you too much, I think having some examples, some visual examples of what this size looks like, or here's a real world example that's 50% bigger than this limitation. And you can get pretty good views of a lot of these things, most things, from Google Street View. So you don't even have to go out necessarily take pictures. You can do it just from your computer.
Well, we don't know how big it is.
That's a good point. I guess you kind of do need to go look at it and measure it. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Commissioner Scavdall, yeah.
I think when you're looking at this, you might consider different square footages, again, for different sized buildings. So one can imagine a building that's 50 feet long or one that's 500 feet long. You would end up with a pretty big sign potentially on some large building. So either try to scale it to the size of the building, or perhaps put a maximum size of a wall sign or something to not get something too out of control
I think that's reasonable.
when you're looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, that said, with the discussion we've already had of wall signs, while it would be helpful to see some real world or some examples of what it might look like at a certain scale, these proposed limits seem pretty good to me, but I think Commissioner Scavdall's suggestion that maybe some overall maximum could be appropriate there as well. Again, without a special permit.
Yep.
I guess I just wanted to ask the question of the commissioners, does it matter in terms of the building size and a maximum sign size if that building is far set back from public roads? Because it could be a large building set way back, so a larger overall sign wouldn't be as detrimental. So At
Yep,
some point,
that makes
something
sense.
has to be subjective.
Yeah.
But if we're going to do a cap, I think it should include essentially how distracting it would be. So you'd have to consider how far away from the traffic and.
From the street,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or leave it the way he
I
proposed
would
it.
just submit for consideration, that's where discretion comes in. I mean, otherwise, at some level, you just say everything's permitted, use your own judgment. And really what a sign ordinance is intended to do is to capture the community value and community aesthetic. And so that's where typically there's an attempt to limit the size of the signs or to allow some discretion to deviate from that.
Yeah, that kind of brings up the concept of how tall is the pole on the pole sign, right? How far the building is back from the street, kind of the same thing. And at some point, I think, you know, again, you have to set limits and maximums for these things.
Especially because they're not absolute limits. They're just limits without a special permit. Yeah.
I guess just to use your logic back on you, the putting cap on that sign could also be looked at as being arbitrary as far as, let's just go back to the original policy of so many square foot per linear foot, and then adding anything else to that is making it more complex. Touche.
Keep going.
Yeah, sure,
All right.
thank you.
So getting down to windows, I think something to note on this one is the area. We have it at 2 per facade, and the area here is 25% of the glass.
Which I will also say is, other areas that I've worked do not allow signage in windows at all. So this is not that,
Why would they not allow any signage in windows?
because it adds a lot of clutter to the appearance of the building.
Okay. Okay. Sure, Commissioner Mitchell?
Is the 25% of the window, each window, or 25% of the overall windows? I'm just trying to picture what we're talking about.
Well, it says 25% of the glass, so it's all the glass. So it, you could conceivably have 4 windows that are each 25 square feet. And you could do a quarter of each of those, or you could do one of those, and that's 25%.
Commissioner West?
So 2 per facade, is it the 2 not totaling more than 25% of the glass, or is it each not totaling more than 25% of the glass?
That's a really, really good question. We'll have to reconcile that.
I think personally I would lean towards a total of not more than 25% of the glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would too. Let's make it that. 25% of the aggregate glass seems like plenty without a special permit or a creative permit or something. And in all of these, we've taken out apex. Some of them were not applicable. Forgive me, I'm actually not even really clear what that means, to be honest. But before in the window one, it had a limit on the apex 6 feet to top of post maximum. maybe I shouldn't worry about it. You've taken it out, but
After speaking with the sign company, or
Okay.
Gentleman in charge of the sign company, it made sense that limiting a lot of, character heights and things like that gets a little bit too deep into particular things about a sign.
yeah,
And so this kind of takes back some of that particular.
sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I don't really mean to belabor that point. Go ahead. If nobody else has anything else, any thoughts on window?
So lastly on this list, aside from the freestanding, which we got through, is the A-frame and standing. So we changed it to 2 per business. That's for, in case a business may be a corner business, or 2 single-sided A-frames from different directions. And so also changed the width and height on those to be more of the standardized height for A-frame signs that you would find.
Commissioner Scavdell?
So I had some comments here. Maybe they would go under clearance. I think these signs shouldn't block sidewalks or ADA access, and maybe we need to at least define that as a 4-foot clear sidewalk or something. And then also, I was wondering if we could specify these are only allowed during open business hours. So when the business is closed, they remove them, put them back inside. And then another sign, and I think we've actually listed it under prohibited signs, but I'm seeing a lot of these are, and I looked them up, I think they call them feather flag banners.
Oh.
Are we gonna, if we're gonna allow those, would those go here? Right now, they're actually prohibited in this ordinance, but there's a preponderance of those out in the community. They're kind of coming on, so are they prohibited or not? And if they're not prohibited, then I think maybe they would go here with A-frame and standing.
So we do have under temporary signs in section 87.2.4.1, strings or individual banners, streamers, pennants, and similar devices. And that's kind of covers, I think, what you're speaking to. If you want it to be more,
Well, under prohibited signs, 87.2.10.4, decorative sign says banner signs, feather banners, yard sign, inflatable signs. Decorative signs essentially are prohibited, so we just need to clarify.
except when used as temporary signs, consistent with section
okay, got it.
87.2.3.
Okay.
Oh, yes, Commissioner West. Thanks.
I think I like how it's written right now personally, where if you wanted to use a feather sign on a more regular basis and on a temporary basis, you would pursue a special discretionary permit, because I think they are another sign type that can easily clutter
Yeah.
the viewscape and do. My other question with A-frame and standing signs, and it may be regulated somewhere else and I'm not seeing it, but I see these often used almost as off-site signs, and I was wondering if we could put in it can only be so far from your business, because I have seen quite a few businesses plop them down 3 or 4 blocks away from their business in the sidewalk, and it becomes a workaround, right, to the off-premise sign.
Yep, we'll refine that.
Okay.
Great. So moving down, let's
Yes.
see, looking at the master sign plan, and here I can, sorry, it's separated onto 2 pages. So the master sign plan, the way it's written at the moment, is a plan it's meant to be a plan to strategically coordinate signs pertinent to any permitted use to identify or advertise multiple places of business for large sites, buildings, non-residential multi-tenant developments, or adjacent or adjoining properties or parcels. So that would include sites greater than 1 acre or tenant spaces above the first floor, or any non-residential building or development building or property with 4 or more tenants will be required to submit a master sign plan. Do we,
And then a master sign plan, sorry, this jumping just a little bit, a couple of lines down
Yeah.
to point 3. A master sign plan shall be principally permitted if in accordance with section 6.5 above, which is the appurtenant sign table,
yes.
correct? So,
So if they chose not to have a freestanding sign per se, and they wanted to do wall or window signs, and each business was consistent with the table there,
each business being consistent with that table, is that, I just, that's what I was wanting to make sure, and maybe it is clear, but that it's not that the totality of it would be limited to that table's size, it would be per business limited to those specifications.
So if the site itself, say, came in and rather than having the large freestanding sign that had a multi-tenant sign on it that was 40 feet off the ground.
Right.
They came in with a monument sign that had name of the center and maybe a few major tenants there, and then each of the tenants complied with the sign specifications in the table, and they were going to completely comply with that for all the tenants. It's administrative approval.
Yes, but when you say each of the tenants, do you mean each of the sort of subcomponents of the master sign, each business's name or advertisement?
Yeah, basically, they're going to say that, like, this tenant has a 20-foot frontage, they get a 20-square-foot sign, and so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to follow the table.
Okay. Okay, yes, it's not a, basically, if principally permitted, if, you know, it's not allowing it to be larger in the total signage.
Right.
Just because it's split among multiple tenants.
Right.
Okay.
do you feel that it needs to be specified for each business having the allowance for principally permitted sign types?
No, I guess I just wanted clarity on whether the total total signage area of a master sign plan was limited to the same specifications as the table if it is to be principally permitted. And yes, that the answer is yes.
Yeah, so one of the things we're going to have to be careful of when we bring back any kind of limitation on the total number of signs, it's like that would be for an individual use, because when you get into this, like if you've got a long shopping center, probably the best example I can think of is the shopping center out in McKinleyville. So you've got a bunch of signs along there, and say maybe you said the limit is 500 square feet. And Safeway is probably going to use that up all by itself. And then you've got all the other inline shops. So we'll nuance it to allow that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess while I'm having a hard time knowing what would be better, I am slightly concerned that to encourage a master sign plan, we might want to allow a little bit more total signage than what an individual business would get. But, you know, I don't feel strongly, and I don't have really clear thoughts about this at this point, I'm afraid.
I understand the desire. I think the struggle is that, you know, these are all just political lines to begin with. Or we'll call them discretionary lines, how's that?
Okay.
And so really what it is, you know, if they're just basically staying with that standard, then it's fine. But on the other hand, if they want to deviate from that, maybe get a little larger because they've designed, you know, a certain thing that is going on in the center. Like, I'll use the old Kmart and Ray's as an example. I mean, that building actually has some architectural intent for the signage, whereby there's this band that goes along the top of the tenant spaces. And they've clearly articulated how much of that band can be used for signage. It actually, somebody thought about the signage when they designed the building. It's beautiful. And so there should be some creative intent to allow that kind of thing to go on, and maybe allow the signage to be a little bit bigger if it fits within the architecture of the building.
Right. But discretionary permit.
But it's discretionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I'm fine with that. Any other thoughts on the master plan section? And if not,
No, I guess just to your point, are we encouraging places like that to do a plan by offering something more than if each business did their own? Because I think
No,
there's
it's not each business doing their own. It's that we can approve I think we approve we still approve a master sign plan. That still gets approved. But it is consistent with the table above.
Okay. I guess I want to voice my support for more area for that type of sign. Not a ton more, but 10 to 25% more.
Given larger allowances is what you're saying?
Yes.
yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how much more, but feels like if we want to encourage coordination and the use of a master sign plan, having it be a little bit more than what a single business would be allowed just makes sense to me, you know? But again, that may not be a consensus view, but that's, I guess, let's just say that's an alternative to consider.
So let me offer, why would you treat a business in a shopping center differently than a business that is in a freestanding building? Why can't the business in the freestanding building have the same opportunity to have a larger sign?
I guess my thought is by concentrating businesses in that way, you bring more businesses into a smaller net space than if they were all spread out as freestanding buildings. And therefore, in doing so, there's a certain logic to having more signage for that lot, for that business entry, because you're accessing more businesses.
So typically, the purpose of a master sign plan is so that you don't get a bunch of divergent signs in very close proximity, so that
Right.
there is a set of standards that identify the design of the signs, and it's consistent throughout the center. It's consistent with the building design, consistent with the architecture, colors, that sort of thing. So it's not, I mean, this is not really an encouragement. This is saying we care about the design of this shopping center, and so we're not going to let the individual tenants have free rein to do their own thing. So I think that what we're saying is that if you want to get a little bit bigger, everybody has the same opportunity. It's a discretionary process.
Okay. Yes,
I
Commissioner
guess
Mitchell.
I would add a counterpoint to that, which is smaller businesses inside of a larger building or series of buildings are harder to see. The larger buildings may have, everyone knows where it is, or there's the name on it. It's just nationally recognized. It encourages small businesses and helps them to succeed if they can have a part of that master sign to put their, local logo on there. So I think we should encourage those master sign agreements for the reasons that you mentioned about not having a bunch of different, designs. And I think it's reasonable to give them more space.
I kind of see it the same way.
Yeah, I don't understand so I'm imagining that these sites are like a strip mall. And so they would have a monument sign out front that might have, the name of the mall or whatever, the shopping center or whatever it is, and the name of all the businesses. And then each business still has all the sign area that any other business would be allowed to have, only it would be in a coordinated fashion, so maybe they have a similar look to their signage across the businesses or something. I'm not understanding why they need more.
Would they be allowed the same space as, but a single business, I mean, a single business could have that full sign for its business. If a master sign plan, and maybe I'm not understanding this, if a master sign is supposed to incorporate any number of businesses, let's just say it's 6, to divide the sign size that would have effectively advertised one business into 6 makes it pretty small. That's,
It's not, it's based upon the frontage of the tenant space.
okay.
So it's not like you take the 100 square feet, and if there's a larger tenant in there, they have a bigger tenant space, the master sign plan could dictate that there's a larger sign for them.
Okay.
If it's a smaller tenant space, say 20 feet, they get 20 square feet. So it really is proportionate.
Maybe I was fundamentally misunderstanding. I thought the whole thing, if principally permitted, still had to meet the, a monument that's 32 square feet, 8 feet maximum.
Well, the monument, yes.
Monument, yes, okay.
Right, but that's where if they want to stay within that area, that's administrative. The master sign plan is administrative. If they want to do something more, they want to do something different, then it's discretionary. That's a pretty standard approach.
Sure, I think I was just, I don't want to belabor this point anymore. I think I was not quite clear on how this would apply, but.
So I've had my businesses in several of these types of properties, and I would get the name of my business out at the street on the monument sign, and then within the complex, I would also have the name of my business with my logo or whatever it is on my storefront, right?
Yeah,
With whatever the criteria is for the amount of storefront that I have and wall space or window space or whatever I'm using.
and just to be clear, sorry, not to jump in, but I totally get that on the storefront itself, proportional to the size, there's similar standards should apply. I was referring to the big sign out at the street that advertises the fact that there's 6 or 12 businesses in here. How big can that be? That's all I was really kind of getting at.
Okay.
Because if it's limited to the same size that would advertise one business, but it's supposed to advertise 12, how does that work? I just don't get it. So,
And maybe part of the question here is, and we can bring back options on this, is that, maybe a monument sign can vary based upon the street frontage in terms of size. So that if you have a large shopping center with, multiple tenants, you get a little bit more area.
I think that's the sort of logic that I'm trying imperfectly to get at here. So, but again, and hopefully this wasn't a total waste of time, but we've spent a lot on it, and I really want to make sure we have enough time to get to the rest of this stuff. So,
I just wanted to agree with that.
okay, yeah.
So, moving down from here. we've
Yes,
got
please.
Existing billboards.
Now we get to billboards.
And I guess I'll just go through some of the things that we've changed. So, in terms of the failure to provide active and compliant outdoor advertising display permits, we included the compliance with the Outdoor Advertising Act, just to ensure that the payment for removal is included. So it's just to further be compliant with the state, including adding more of a more definition for placement, which is defined by the Outdoor Advertising Act. And you'll see here is the definition, which has been laid out based on what the state has for placement. which this would not be permitted. And moving down from there, we included oh, this is also part of the placement. I'm sorry about that. So J is also including is language from placement. And then we removed the maintenance requirements that we talked about at the last hearing. We discussed that was a contentious issue, and we were looking to remove it. And then we also specified unauthorized placement activities, which have been defined above, would be declared a public nuisance as defined by our code for category 4 violation. And those are all the changes. So if there's anything in particular in here you want to look at, I can just start back at the top.
Sure, but do you want to, before you get into the details, Commissioner West, you have your hand up.
I mean, I just generally had questions about this, so we could, did you have more to say back at the top? So I guess I'll just start, I'll shoot off a couple.
So maybe just one thing. So we haven't gotten to it yet, but basically billboards and off-site signs are prohibited. So what we're really doing here is defining how we're dealing with existing billboards. And to a certain extent, we're limited by state law in terms of what we can do. And so one of the things that we're presenting to you is here are the state definitions. We've just pulled them out of the state code, put them right into here so that it's clear. Everybody understands. Here's what we can and can't do. So, sorry, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So I think my first question is Section 87.2.8.5, the county may declare its intent to require removal of an existing billboard. In what instances would this apply?
So if basically the planning commission were to be reviewing a development project of some sort and saw that there's a billboard right adjacent to it and thought, that billboard has become a really a blight on the area. So then you'd make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that you believe that the billboard should be removed. So then this process would be initiated by the board.
So only in the instance that there was a permit associated with the property, or could we initiate the removal of any billboard?
You could do that under any circumstances. I was just giving you a kind of, it came across your awareness and you thought that it should be removed. The board could come to that conclusion and a board member could bring that to the board, staff could bring that to the board. But
Okay.
basically, this outlines the process by which the county can have a billboard removed. And this is the legal process that we can pursue.
And this is essentially what I saw several commenters asking for a buyout of billboards, and this would be that process.
This is that process.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I have a couple more questions, but I don't want to hog the mic if the other commissioners have burning questions or
On
comments.
billboards?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't see anybody else waving their hand, so.
So you've laid this out really nicely, but I think it's been such a hot topic for so long that I'd love it to be said in plain language here, just for folks who are interested. So if a billboard, under these proposed policies, if a billboard were to fall down, how would these policies apply, and could somebody re-erect that billboard?
So I believe that a billboard, if it falls down, I think that it can be replaced unless we want to buy it out. If there's a natural disaster that knocks it down. So there seems to be some case law that says if a natural disaster brings it down, they don't have the right to maintain it. The struggle is the difference between maintenance and placement. So the situation that we had before with that billboard out on 101 that fell down, I think that fell down all by itself. So at that point, would that be gone? We would just require the site to be cleaned up. If somebody went out and helped it fall down, I think they could maintain it.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yes, Commissioner Mitchell.
The last meeting, we talked about there being some gray area in terms of what exactly constituted maintenance. And I think you mentioned that we'd received a letter from an attorney claiming that certain things were off limits in terms of our regulation. And I want to voice my support for the county getting its own attorney or determining what is the actual limitations on us so that we can adequately regulate this activity.
So I will say, I think we do have our own attorney. And I think we've gotten really, really good guidance on this. And I think that we're at a very, very defensible place.
So I didn't mean to imply we didn't have in-house county counsel. I meant to refer to experts in the specific, case law and goes to court and deals with this on a daily basis, if that's the type of attorney we're going up against. I feel a strong sense from the community and all the way up to individuals within the county that I've spoken to that we want to make sure we're as regulating as much of this activity as possible, even if there is a disagreement on where that limit is.
Appreciate that. And I think what we chose to do was to incorporate the state provisions directly into our ordinance so that really there's not an interpretive issue there. It's really an understanding that we are, at this point, going to fulfill what the state allows us to do.
And is that language from the Coastal Act
No.
as well?
So the Coastal Commission believes they don't have the same limitations that local government does when it comes to billboards.
So,
Local government is clearly restrained
By the Outdoor Advertising
by the
Act.
Outdoor Advertising Act. The Coastal Commission believes that, and this is true across the board, that they have a set of state regulations that sit at or above other state regulations. And so they're either equivalent or they take precedent.
so then how do we make sure that we write a local coastal program that is both defensible from the Outdoor Advertising Act perspectives and other rights of billboard owners that will be approved by the Coastal Commission, which is a state agency?
Well, we believe we have.
Okay.
We believe that's what we're submitting to you, and what I'm presenting to you, not wanting to confuse things, but the state believes they have the ability to go beyond what we're proposing here. I will present to you for understanding that they have opportunities to act on that, and they have not. So there is talk and there's action.
Thank you.
I guess what I would just ask is, and I do appreciate the work that has gone into this and the level of detail that's been added pertaining to billboards. This is a question really for county council more than the director. Do you feel that this set of provisions is as strong and aggressive in trying to assert the right to protect against or remove or limit the maintenance or otherwise, basically as aggressively as the law allows us to do? Like, this is about as far as we can go and still be defensible?
There's a lot of case law, not just with the state maybe coming after people, but people being able to facially challenge our own act, facially challenge our own ordinances for failure to comply. There's due process issues, there's taking issues, especially when businesses have come in. And that's really the main one that they're trying to protect against, is these people invested some money before an ordinance even came around. So we've done very thorough research and feel that this is where we're comfortable defending the ordinance.
Okay. Commissioner Mitchell.
If I can just ask, I guess, one example, because we spoke about it the last time, in terms of replacing support beams, the question, it was unanswered the last time we spoke, whether or not it could be a support beam that's going through ESHA could be replaced with a different beam through a different opening in the ESHA with a stronger material or a larger post. How would that be addressed in this?
It's allowed. It's maintenance. As long as it's a legal billboard for which there is a permit. And one of the things that you're likely to see a letter on, and we've only received this verbally, but we've not been able to confirm that it actually exists in the law, is that there has been an assertion made to us that not all billboards are permitted and that they still have the same rights to maintain unpermitted billboards. And we've not found that in the law. We've only found that billboards need to be permitted, and so that's how it's currently written.
And replacing a beam and disturbing ESHA would normally be disallowed, but in this case, it's allowed because of?
Because the state preempts us.
As long as it's like for like.
Yep.
If it's into a different location, which I don't know if, I can't tell if that's what you're maybe addressing, but if it's into a different location or it's a different configuration, in those cases, that is not considered maintenance. That's considered placement. It has to be the same.
Same hole.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner West.
I'm having a little bit of confusion with the definition of maintenance, and I think it's probably just because you're referring to the Outdoor Advertising Act, and I haven't gone and looked at the specifics of that, because like the way I read J is that most of these maintenance tasks that we're talking about are not allowed, but it sounds like in the Outdoor Advertising Act that there are specific maintenance acts that are allowed. Am I understanding that correctly?
So are you talking about the placement A through J?
Yes, and maybe I'm misreading it.
So
Sorry, if I may. J is regarding the face, is a lot of what that's regarding.
So if maybe this helps, what's written there is the definition of placement. And so all those things are not maintenance. That is placement. That would not be allowed. Because we don't allow new billboards, so we don't allow placement.
So then we are silent on maintenance, essentially.
I thought we had a provision for maintenance.
Am I missing it?
We did not define
We did not
maintenance.
define
We
maintenance, okay.
specifically defined placement because maintenance is very vague in the Outdoor Advertising Act, so it's really hard to define it. Whereas placement is much more specific.
But I'm not sure if this is exactly what Commissioner West was getting at, but J, the end of the list of what placement includes, begins with the word maintaining. And that's a little bit where, at least my confusion around this, that last, section J seems to be discussing maintenance, and yet it's listed as prohibited because it's defined as placement. And
But because, see, and I think the thing that is really important there is it's when it's not performed incident to the change of an advertising message or customary. So any of those things are placement when they're not associated with an existing sign.
So the keyword there is customary maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if I could maybe
Okay.
say it a different way, maintenance is everything up to placement. But where placement starts, that's what we know is the limit.
So staff doesn't feel that discussing maintenance restrictions at all is legally defensible.
I mean, we can, but then we're identifying things that are absolutely allowed. And the thing that we can more easily define is what's not allowed. And what's not allowed clearly is placement.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Would it be possible to thread the needle a little further and add other definitions of what's not maintenance and prohibit them? If it's gray what maintenance is, then it's gray what maintenance isn't. And could we, for locally specific reasons, define the fact that replacing beams with stronger structural material is not maintenance, for
Well,
example?
I think the problem is that gets into the very nature of the interpretive value of this whole thing. And that is the way the Outdoor Advertising Act has structured the law, is between maintenance, which is, Jacob mentioned, is ill-defined, and placement, which is very well-defined. And so it seems to draw the line at placement. And so if we try to define maintenance and we exclude activities that interpretationally could be allowed under the Outdoor Advertising Act, then we're in violation of that. Because it's allowed by the Outdoor Advertising Act.
So I can imagine a world where there are things that aren't specifically allowed that would fall under the generic category of maintenance, but because they're not specifically required to be allowed, we could disallow them, right?
Well, I think that's where we originally tried to go, in all honesty, Commissioner Mitchell. That was our objective when we started this. And we found, from an interpretational standpoint, that we're now defining things that may run afoul of the Outdoor Advertising Act. And so it's far safer to draw the line at the same place the Outdoor Advertising Act draws the line. Because if we draw it in a different place and we get challenged, we don't have the value of the Outdoor Advertising Act line as our defense. We've got something that we defined.
Yes, but if the majority of the community is behind us and it's not prohibited by the Outdoor Advertising Act, and it makes sense.
But the problem is it's not as clear. And what, I'm not going to put words in county council's mouth, but
I think county
what
council had her hand up.
council would prefer to do is not create vulnerabilities that are unnecessary.
Well, is it county council's decision as to what policies we feel that we need to enact.
All we can do is give you the best possible recommendation. I'll get out of the way.
So the Outdoor Advertisement Act is very clear and defines placement very, very well. But what they've also made clear in the courts is that maintenance doesn't have to be defined by the Outdoor Advertisement Act. It can be defined by future court cases. So as court cases continue to come through, the definition of maintenance is changing depending on what the circumstances of those cases are saying. And so from a county council perspective, we are doing a risk assessment and saying these things are very clear. Placement, we can prohibit. We can prohibit these things and say this is not to change, but some of the customary maintenance is expressly allowed by the act. So we are going to run into a preemption issue because customary maintenance is expressly allowed. What we define that as is not.
So I would make a strong argument that placing stronger materials and bigger beams is not customary maintenance. It is trying to skirt the law using the Outdoor Advertising Act as a pretense, and until somebody, a city or county, says, we are not going to allow this in our community, we are going to prohibit that, and it's not outlawed, it's not required by the Outdoor Advertising Act, and it's more consistent with protecting coastal resources. And so I believe that we should recommend that we do that, and that the Board of Supervisors can decide whether or not the cost and benefit or risk and reward, or however you describe it, whether that's something we should do. But that our policy recommendations should not be based on the fact that no court has decided that that's allowed yet. I believe that our rights as individuals and as a county are unlimited unless expressly prohibited. And in this case, we are not expressly prohibited from defining customary maintenance in Humboldt County as not making the billboards stronger so that they last in perpetuity.
I'm not sure about that. I would say that the law is written to allow them to maintain those billboards in perpetuity. And the law is pretty clear that if the local jurisdiction wants to get rid of them, they get to buy them.
Well,
That's what the law says.
creating bigger support beams is not maintenance. It does allow them to maintain, paint, varnish, replace when weak with this light kind, but I think what's going on is beyond that. And I'm only trying to suggest we stop what's beyond that.
Commissioner West.
I have a question about what it looks like to buy a billboard out. I know you can't probably put a precise number on it, but trying to understand perhaps the cost to the county to buy a billboard out. If you have any numbers around that.
It varies depending on how many years out you're expecting them to remove the billboard. And it also depends on the zone itself. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it starts around 7,000 up to over 20,000, something like that. I think. Yeah, so it's just compensation off of what they were expecting to make off of that billboard. So they have tables in the ODA, but for me, they're probably a little bit more difficult to read. I'm sure council might have a better time reading those.
So if someone were to propose buying out a billboard, it would, and we're considering the cost to the county, we would expect somewhere around maybe $20,000 as a starting. I know, like, just to sort of get, it's not $100,000, it's not $5,000, it's somewhere in between to buy a billboard out.
I think it's going to be dependent upon the location and the projected return on the billboard. And I think that's where the table comes in, is that there's value in terms of what the ability to rent the billboard is.
It's the projected return over a series of years.
Yeah. It's not just the cost of the billboard.
Yeah, yeah. What, is it the 7 years, like, I see 7 years in here, or is it like the expected life of the billboard,
So
say 20
one of the
years?
things there's a couple things that go into it. First is the amortization. How much did they invest to buy the property and the billboard and the value of that based upon the expected return? So that's the starting point. Then you give them a period of time to recoup that value. If they can recoup that value, then obviously the amount that you're going to spend to buy the billboard out goes down. So you can, is it 3 years?
I think minimum is 2 or 3 years.
So you could give them 3 years, but then there's the amortization becomes a problem because then they're still very much recouping value from that billboard. So that's why it's highly variable.
That helps, thank you.
Well, we don't have a whole lot of time left, and there is still the last couple pages to get to. Is there anything else that we haven't really covered already about billboards that we want to address? Okay. Then maybe we should move to design standards and the prohibited signs.
So yeah, going down into design standards, it's the particular section in design standards is illumination. So this really is focused on illumination here, and a lot of what we were doing was trying to reduce the glare on residential zone districts and also on roads and the night sky. So if there's anything particular in here you would like, I can move it around. It's on 2 pages as well.
Let me see. I think I am trying to make sure that I'm clear about the difference between the digital signs that are prohibited in the next section versus, well, so the illumination standards here do not include any kind of digital signage. Is that correct? This is just
That is
the
correct.
sort of lighting on.
Bulbs. Yes.
Yeah, okay, okay. Yes, Commissioner Mitchell.
Would this be an appropriate time to discuss the differences in terms of impact to the environment between a digital billboard and a standard billboard that's illuminated? Because as far as I understand, they both have the issue of potential night sky issues as well as being distracting to drivers. But I guess I'm just wondering why one is allowed and one isn't. If the illumination is brighter and with certain colors or changing colors, I could see situations in which it was more distracting than a digital billboard that's, could potentially be shut off after dark. So just curious why one has limitations, why the other's prohibited entirely.
Yeah, so this one, for the illuminated bulbs, they need to be steady and stationary and static in color. So they're not supposed to change colors, and that's not, with digital signage, you're going to have changing messages, different colors. They also can't be shielded, whereas bulbs can be shielded. There's ways to shield them, and there's other ways to protect the night sky with bulbs versus a digital sign, which is just open, has an open face.
So a digital sign that followed the requirements that you just described for an illuminated billboard that agreed to shut itself off at, dusk or an hour after sunset or whatever's reasonable for night sky purposes, would it still have the same impact if it were allowed?
So I'm going to say one, I assume when you're saying billboard, you're meaning a sign. We're not just talking about billboard.
I'm sorry, I do mean a sign.
Yes, so the digital signs have different issues than the illumination. I mean, for purposes of why we're prohibiting digital and animated and changeable copy signs, that's a different issue than just the illumination issue. The illumination issue is one of creating glow and glare above the sign, around the sign, and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So I guess what I'm asking is, did we attempt to see if digital billboards could be used in a regulated manner in the way that we're regulating the illuminated billboards?
Signs.
Signs,
Yeah.
excuse me.
Not huge things, but yeah.
Yeah, just a little sign.
Right. Yeah.
So the short answer to that is no. We looked at the digital signs as being something that, because from a lighting standpoint, it creates flicker, it creates other impacts that affect the nighttime environment. Digital signage also are a distraction to drivers. I mean, do we really want to have people trying to read changeable copy signs driving down the road? And our answer to that is no.
And I think that generally makes sense. I want to put it out there that I think that the illuminated ones have the potential to be more distracting than the animated signs if they're regulated in terms of being shut off after dark or shielded so that they don't go up.
That addresses the light flicker and that kind of thing, but that does not address the distraction concern associated with a changeable copy sign, where you're asking a driver to take their eyes off the road and look at a sign as it changes copy and changes text or changes pictures.
So the things that you've mentioned could also be mitigated because digital signs could be the future. There could be signs that only change once a week or once a day, not being animated all the time. So if we could regulate the distraction and the other impacts you're describing, they could be...
Those are policy discussions that we can certainly have, but that is not currently how the signs function. And we're looking at, frankly, how signs, the digital copy, the animated, changeable copy signs currently function. And they're constantly changing, they're constantly presenting new information.
I want to get into, but Commissioner West, you have your hand up.
I think just broad policy for me, I support prohibiting digital signs. I think more than just being a distraction, the aesthetics of them are not in line with the rural character and the small town qualities that I think Humboldt has. When they go up, they tend to be, they have a very different character and a very different aesthetic, and I am not in support of them being a part of the view shed.
I'd just like to say that having just discussed these provisions casually with quite a few people, I've been surprised how many people have pushed back on the idea that we would absolutely prohibit digital signs. And I think, you know, I like Brian was just saying, you know, I think it's one thing to prohibit things that are animated, flashing, blinking, moving, and changing color. I think those are a potential distraction. I think they're ugly. I think they're annoying. I think it is another thing to say that, you know, Eureka Natural Foods has a sign, I'm just using them as an example, I'm not sure if they do, that, you know, that has, like, you know, great price on shrimp or salmon today or whatever, and it's like they got it there for the day or the week. And I don't think they always do change. I mean, some signs do. There's one like the Mingtree Realty, sorry to pick on them, but like just across the street from this building, that thing is just like, oh my God, what's happening on that? But something that just shows the special of the day serves a function for a small business that is, I've been told by several other people that they don't think we should prohibit that type of digital sign. So I'm Commissioner West.
Oh, I didn't want to
Oh, I
cut you
thought,
off.
well, no, I'm, that's the end of my thought.
Okay. I think I don't know how many people you've heard from, but I think universally all I've heard is a great distaste from the community for digital signs. But I do think that if we're going to dance into the consideration of digital signs, there is a quality. I would like to have us consider some considerations around the quality of digital signs. Eureka Natural Foods has a very high quality digital sign, and that impacts your experience of it versus other signs locally that have a different quality to them. And it's late, so I'm not having the words to describe what
Yep.
those qualities are, but like, before we get to the end of this, I would encourage you to look around at different digital signs and start
Yeah.
to notice. I think that Eureka Natural Foods is the best example of a digital sign. So if we are going to dance in that direction, I hope that we talk about some limitations. on it.
Standards, yes. Commissioner Mitchell.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to your point, and that they absolutely can be done in the way that Eureka Natural Foods has. And with the way technology develops, I mean, actual physical signs might not be a thing, just like I don't get any actual paper or books or maps for these meetings. I get digital versions. And if we put this in a code, then it takes a long time and there's all sorts of process to keep up with technology. If we simply said they're only allowed if they meet the planning department's guidelines for digital signs on our website, or something that would be legally allowable, then as the technology updates, then perhaps only certain models are allowed now, but others would later.
Chair, if I could.
Yes.
So we could probably come up with those guidelines if they would need to be articulated in the ordinance. But one of the things we could not include within those guidelines is text or copy. I mean,
I'm
once
not
you
following.
allow the sign type, you can no longer regulate the copy. So
Well-
they're going to be able to do whatever they want on that sign.
I guess what I was getting at is not that we should regulate the choice of words, but that we should make a distinction between a sign which has a fixed digital message that changes from time to time from one that is rotating, flashing, blinking, moving, changing color.
I'm not sure we can do that.
Okay. I mean, we do have a carve out for fuel signs, time and date.
Well, but that the state does that.
The state, that's a state carve out? Okay.
Yes.
I kind of figured it probably was, but it's just not obvious to me why we couldn't sort of say the only circumstances, and by the way, you know, not administratively, but with a special permit or use permit, that there could be very limited circumstances in which we consider it acceptable. I mean, I thought we could, the key thing has to do with how often it changes, I thought, in terms of the biggest arguments against it.
So it really comes down to community character and community preference. And I'm clearly hearing there's a disagreement amongst members of the commission about whether or not something is appropriate for the community or not. And, you know, what a sign ordinance does is recognizes that there is the need for a business to be able to advertise itself. And then identifies how that's done in a manner that's compatible with the community aesthetic. And so the real question is does Humboldt County want reader boards or digital signs to be flashing at people, at the public, at drivers going up and down the road, or
Right.
just in general. That's the fundamental question.
You said flashing, and
I
I think
did.
we all agree we don't want flashing signs. But I'm saying, can we be a little bit more nuanced about exactly what we're trying to prohibit here?
We can probably put performance criteria in there, but in terms of if it's a sign that has changeable text and the nature of the changeable text, and we say that's okay, I think that's the limit of our regulation.
Okay, Commissioner Scavdall.
Yeah, I share Commissioner West's concerns. Just because the technology exists doesn't mean we have to go there. And if we do allow digital signs, businesses are competitive and trying to gain attention. So when I test these about whether I think we should allow them or not, I have to imagine a scenario where every business has a digital sign. And I just don't think that's the character of the community that we're trying to develop. So,
Yeah.
not a fan. I admit there can be some nicer ones, better ones, and worse ones than Snap, but if we're allowing them, then they're allowed for everybody. And I just don't think that's where we want to go.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, the last thing I really saw myself doing in this ordinance would be like defending digital signs. But I've been surprised by the number of people who have said to me, like, be careful that you don't throw out the good, useful kind of digital signs along with the annoying ones. And maybe there's no good way to set that line between what we think is tasteful and not distracting versus what is tasteless, and but I thought I at least had to articulate that I've heard some concerns from people about that. People who consider themselves environmentalists and all the rest of it,
Question.
Yes.
Are we allowed to prohibit any sign from blinking, changing colors, and the things that we're concerned about with that type of billboard, or sign, excuse me, that we are setting criteria for, it sounds like, for illuminated signs, and could be in something that we haven't even thought of yet, like the new hologram advertising device I just invented and patented, that won't be covered under a digital billboard, but will do the blinking and stuff until we change this rule. So is it allowable to say no blinking, no changing color, no changing text more than once a week or once a day, and no illumination at night beyond so many lumens? Could we do that?
I think the lumens and probably the blinking and some of that stuff we could set performance criteria for. Somewhere in there's a line that infringes upon First Amendment rights. And when you allow somebody to have a sign that has the capacity, the technology to change text, then we're telling them that they can only use it in a certain way. Frankly, it's not something that I've gone down that legal path of exploring that before. We're telling people they can have a changeable copy sign, but they can't change the copy.
Well, it's like TVs. We say you can't play certain types of movies during certain times.
I don't think we do that.
Well, not we as the Planning Commission, but we as a society. So the same First Amendment principle, I think, applies to the sign. If it's able to not have any impacts, then why can't they use it to advertise what's the produce of the day?
We can look into that. And if that's something the commission wants to have, that's fine. But I think that's just going to be a policy decision. I mean, and frankly, one of the reasons that we wanted to have the other sign before you is so that you could see a real life example of why people complain about them.
To have an image of it, you mean, or to have the other permit you referred to, got it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a changeable copy sign, and it's a little bit close to a residential area.
Well, so, we've done a pretty good job of getting through this all. It is basically, it's at 9:28. I wanted to ask the commissioners if there are any other provisions here in the last couple of pages that you wanted to call out, comment on, ask a question about, or otherwise get into very quickly. I mean, so in other words, have we gotten through the discussion that we felt we needed to have? You guys feel like?
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a comment earlier on the feather banners that was addressed.
Yes.
Under decorative signs. Yep.
I'm glad you
My
did.
comments in.
Okay, good. And I'm glad you called that out. Basically, feather banners are only allowed as temporary signs, not as permanent installations,
That is correct.
which I think is a good thing because they must be just so cheap, and that's why you see
Yes.
them everywhere. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Dunn, Director Ford, Council, for walking us through all this. And so I guess what remains is for us to continue this item to January 18th? Or would we,
So let me ask Jacob a question.
okay.
Can we turn this around for the 4th? Yeah. Would you want to come back and discuss this on January 4th, since we don't have other items on that day?
I personally will not be able to attend on the 4th, but that's not a reason why we shouldn't do it.
We'll continue to the 18th.
Okay. Okay. Okay,
I move we continue it to the 18th of January.
we have a motion to
I'll
continue, it,
second that.
seconded by Commissioner Scavdall. All right, I think we'll just take a voice vote on that. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. That's unanimous. Okay. Quickly, Director Ford, is there any other report you wanted to make?
I do. There's a couple things I wanted to bring up. One is that was down at the Coastal Commission yesterday, and the Coastal Commission denied the appeal of the Nordic project. And so that permit is now approved, as it was approved by the county, by the Board of Supervisors, which is largely how the Planning Commission approved it. I also wanted to bring up that Bear River Farms went to the Board of Supervisors on appeal. And, you know, I just want to be straight up that staff didn't support the action of the Planning Commission largely because the findings were lacking. I'll just say that. You know, and the board understood that, and the board really took action based upon the facts and the merit. And I think it was hard. Nobody liked it, but it's really a matter of looking at the facts as they exist and making sure that the findings are there to support that.
Commissioner Mitchell.
I may be having deja vu, so if this hasn't happened before, excuse me, but I believe in the past this has happened, and the Planning Commission has asked that if we are having motions about to be passed and there are inadequate findings as judged by staff, that you please point that out so that we can have our motions not be overturned on technicalities. And if I haven't asked that, I would ask it now.
And I will politely respond that I ask for continuance to do just that. You ran over me.
Yeah, I do remember that you were concerned about that vote that we took. Yeah, well, anyway, thanks for the report. Anything else?
Yeah, could I just ask, on some of these ordinances, like the sign ordinance that we're looking at, there's a lot of changes and there's a lot of strikeouts. Would it be okay if you provided us a marked up copy like you did tonight, but then also a version that has all the changes accepted? Just sometimes
Just
hard to
clean.
read. Just
Yeah.
a clean copy as well as a markup copy would be helpful for me when I'm reviewing. Because they come as a PDF and I can't make my own except changes so I can read them easier. Thank you.
Okay. Any other quick planning commission discussion items? Yes, Commissioner West.
I think I have a question about the upcoming appeal of the Valadeo decision. And I don't know if you can, and it's okay if you can't answer this right now, but just on the discussion of findings, are you able to say what staff's recommendation is going to be at this time?
We think that the planning commission's action on that was completely supported by the facts. And we'll be recommending that the board support that action. The only caveat to that is that currently the applicant is working to try to address some things, so there may be some slight changes to it. But other than that, I think the planning commission's action on that was completely supported by the findings and evidence in the record.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, then let's adjourn until January 18th. Thanks, everyone.